Robert Baratheon did not die in the Kingswood. The boar's tusks tore through his side and the king collapsed with blood soaking his leather jerkin, but the unthinkable did not come to pass. By the time the king's men found him on the forest floor, he was white as chalk and his breath came in rattling gasps. Ser Barristan Selmy knelt over his sovereign, fierce Stark in his usually calm face. Grand Maester Pycelle was too far away to administer aid. It was the loyal men of the King's Guard, old battle companions, and a few level-headed huntsmen who slowed the bleeding with tunics and strips of cloak. They fashioned a makeshift litter and carted Robert's limp form back to the Red Keep in a desperate scramble, no one quite believing he could live. But Robert Baratheon, in ways both wondrous and terrible, had always been blessed by the gods of war. The man who had slain Rhaegar Targaryen upon the trident cheated death once more. He lingered near the stranger's door for days. Cersei Lannister watched from a distance, golden hair unbound over her shoulders, face an unmoving mask. The small folk whispered that she seemed more statue than grieving wife. Eddard Stark, newly made Hand of the King, rarely left Robert's bedside, his stiff northern sense of honor making him vow silently to guide his old friend to safety, be it in life or in death. Grand Maester Pycelle ministered daily, speaking soothing words, but Eddard saw the tremors in the old man's hands as he stirred potions. Varys glided in the shadows, offering morsels of counsel and rumor. Renly Baratheon paced outside the king's chambers with Loras Tyrell, hopeful smiles straining the corners of their mouths. Littlefinger hovered as well, though none could guess at the shape of his thoughts. In the end, it was the raw vigor of Robert's spirit that saved him, that bullish refusal to yield. The king woke in the quiet pre-dawn hush, drenched in sweat, his face set in a stubborn grimace of pain. He woke to find Eddard Stark alone in the chamber, having dozed in the corner. Cersei was nowhere to be seen. "Gods be good," Ned muttered, eyes heavy with exhaustion but lightning quick to focus on his friend. Robert only groaned. Then he tried to laugh, but it came out as a hacking cough that twisted his face with agony. He clutched at his bandaged side. "Bloody Boar nearly gutted me," he rasped when he caught his breath. "I feel as though I've been turned inside out." Ned stood to hold him upright, afraid that at any moment the king might slip away again. "Easy, my friend," Ned said, voice cracking with relief. "We nearly lost you. Stay still." Robert turned his head to the shuttered window. It was dawn and pale light was creeping in. "Another chance," he murmured. "The gods gave me another chance." And though his voice was low and strangled by pain, Ned heard something there he scarcely recognized: regret. At first, Robert's convalescence was a swirl of rumors and uncertainty. The king drifted in and out of feverish dreams. Sometimes he spoke to Ned plainly, other times he thrashed and cursed, calling for Lyanna and cursing Rhaegar. Eddard was reminded with sorrow that Robert was still half-ruled by the ghosts of his past. But day by day, the color returned to Robert's cheeks. The huntsman's rough work had saved him, slowing the bleeding until Pycelle's poppy milk and tinctures could seal the wounds. The stitches holding his side together were grotesque, but it was enough. Cersei came to see him. She stood by the bed, her face carefully composed. Robert watched her for some time, no words passing between them. He asked about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. He was told they were safe, that they prayed for his health daily. A cool silence lengthened between king and queen until she took her leave. Ned sensed a great shift in Robert, somewhere deep in the man's tired soul. The wildness in Robert's eyes was being tempered by the knowledge he had come so close to greeting the stranger, and that, for once, no great victory or throne awaited him on the other side of his battlefield. Only darkness. Fever dreams or no, there was an unmistakable tension in how Robert's gaze lingered on his Lannister queen. There was a deep suspicion there, something that roiled in him from the hunts gone awry, from the wine that had been poured so freely, from the hush that blanketed the Red Keep in those days of his near-death. He demanded to speak with Eddard alone for hours. He questioned everything, demanded to see the wineskin from that fateful hunt, cursing the steward who couldn't produce it. Robert demanded to know every rumor that had spread in his sickbed, what the small council was saying, what Lannister men had done in the city while he was delirious. Ned gave honest, straightforward answers as best he could. Eventually, Robert leaned back against his pillows and sighed, chest heaving with the effort of speech, exhaustion lining his features. "I had dreams," he said, voice hoarse. "You wouldn't believe some of it. Or maybe you would. Lyanna. She was there, Ned. She told me the truth I never cared to hear." Ned was silent, heart-pounding. He recalled his suspicions about Cersei and her children. But Robert fell silent, and those words drifted into the hush. All of that might have faded into the half-truths of King's Landing if not for an event that broke open the illusions of peace. Word arrived from Highgarden that Mace Tyrell was prepared to offer the hand of his daughter Margaery to the king. A younger bride, one who might bear a proper heir to the Baratheon line, untainted by Lannister blood, so the whispers went. Ned was flabbergasted when he first heard the rumor, which came courtesy of Renly Baratheon himself, grinning at the notion. But rumors in King's Landing always carried an undercurrent of blackmail or advantage. And from the corners of the Red Keep, Varys's little birds sang that Cersei's father, Tywin Lannister, was outraged, calling it an insult, a threat to the union that had bound the crown and the Westerlands. The seeds of strife, it seemed, had been sown. But how to wed the king to Margaery Tyrell if Robert was already wed to Cersei? The faith might annul the old marriage if it was proven unconsummated in recent times, or if there were other justifications. Whispers abounded about the parentage of the royal children. The labyrinth of King's Landing politics, so labyrinthine that even Ned Stark found himself stumbling. Something new was in Robert's eyes, a determination to break with the Lannisters at any cost. And a strange kind of resolve, as if in surviving the boar's tusks, he believed the gods wanted him to steer his life and Westeros onto a different course. It took months for Robert to fully regain his strength. In that time, the court was paralyzed by uncertain loyalties. The queen withdrew into herself, rarely seen at feasts, though her beauty was the talk of every gathering. Joffrey strutted as a crown prince, heading a band of gold-cloaked knights, more insufferable by the day. Yet behind the scenes, Robert refused to name him as heir. He spoke of rewriting wills, demanded that Eddard arrange hush-hush meetings with High Septon's envoys. Rumors spread that the king intended to claim that his marriage to Cersei had never been valid, thus questioning even the children she bore. It was a precarious, fractious time. Ned Stark's own sense of honor wavered as he wondered if the realm would truly be served by exposing these highborn scandals. He had come to King's Landing out of duty and once more found himself snared in a web of alliances. In these uneasy days, the name of Margaery Tyrell was whispered as a symbol of the future, arose to bring new life to the realm, to supplant the golden lion that had grown so powerful in the king's halls. The Tyrells, for their part, courted the king's favor with lavish gifts. The woman in question arrived quietly one morning at King's Landing, escorted by Loras Tyrell and a retinue of Highgarden's knights. She was gracious, poised, a girl, really, with a hint of a smile upon her lips. The small folk loved her at first sight. She visited the September of Baelor, prayed for the king's swift recovery, and she had the sense to keep her head bowed in humility. In the hush that followed her introduction, everyone noted that Robert Baratheon's eyes followed her with a kind of longing, or perhaps a kind of hope. When Robert's strength had returned enough that he might walk again, it was time for decisions to be made. Word of the king's new intentions leaked. He sought to set aside Cersei. The justification was couched in the legalities of the faith, but in simpler terms, Robert had concluded that none of Cersei's children were his. So said the whispers. Ned Stark suspected the seeds of that revelation came from something Robert had gleaned during his fevered convalescence, perhaps fragments that Ned himself had let slip in a moment of weakness. But there was no turning back the tide. Robert was unstoppable in his determination, a bull in the ring. Cersei fought, of course. She argued that the faith would not condone this. She insisted that Joffrey was Robert's trueborn son. She employed every ounce of cunning she possessed, sending gold to the High Septon, entreating her father to intervene, pressing on Pycelle to declare that the king's mind was still addled by near death. But as weeks passed, it became apparent that Tywin Lannister was not as invincible as he seemed. The realm had grown uneasy with the rising power of House Lannister. Stannis Baratheon, from Dragonstone, wrote letters supporting the king's new aims, a cunning move, many said, for Stannis had reasons to despise the Lannisters. The Vale of Arryn, led now by Lisa Tully in her son's name, wavered in neutrality. Then came the greatest blow to the Lannisters. Renly Baratheon announced a formal betrothal arrangement for Robert with Margaery Tyrell, suggesting that the High Septon had found cause enough to grant an annulment. The news stunned the realm. All that followed was a swirl of alliances forming and cracking at court. The Lannister bannermen in the city muttered about leaving or swore they would remain to protect the rightful queen. The gold cloaks were quietly bribed by Baelish's cunning, shifting their loyalty in ways that remained hidden for the moment. Meanwhile, the Tyrells spent their coffers lavishly, ensuring the support of dozens of minor lords. Once Robert recovered enough to hold counsel, He roared for finality. He used his kingly authority to declare the old marriage null and void, stating it had been fraudulently entered on the pretense that any child from it would bear true Baratheon blood. Joffrey was declared a bastard, Myrcella and Tommen as well. Robert's voice shook the throne room with a savage roar. I have no heirs by that woman. She is no wife of mine. Let her be gone. The Red Keep reeled. Yet, surprisingly, Cersei did not flee the city. She retreated to her quarters with her children, glowering behind closed doors while Lannister men ringed her in a show of force. Eddard Stark feared a civil war might ignite right there in King's Landing, for Tywin would never permit this insult to go unpunished. But time passed, and word came that Tywin's response was to summon his bannermen. Yet he did not march on the capital immediately. Perhaps he had his own reasons to bide his time. Ned recalled how methodically Tywin could wage a war. In the midst of this tension, Margaery Tyrell was wed to Robert Baratheon in the Great September of Baelor. The ceremony was a lavish display of gold and roses, officiated by the High Septon himself. The city's populace turned out in throngs. Great was the curiosity at seeing the big, boisterous king standing beside the slender maiden of Highgarden. Robert, though still gone from his ordeal, wore a black velvet doublet embroidered with gold stags. Margaery's gown was the color of pure ivory with an intricately woven pattern of vines and thorns at the sleeves. She seemed calm, almost demure, beside Robert's rough edges. When she lifted her gaze to him for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of what? Compassion? Determination? No one could say, but the union was sealed with great pomp. Bells tolled and cheers erupted along the streets. Most small folk, it seemed, had tired of the Lannisters' endless arrogance and welcomed this new queen with open arms. They believed Margaery Tyrell's southern grace might soften the king's infamous temper, and they prayed for an heir, a fresh line unentangled with Lannister cunning. What none could have predicted that day was the toll this arrangement would extract on House Stark and on the entire realm. For Ned Stark, who stood as hand of the king, the marriage was a bitter test of his honor. He had kept silent about many details about the suspicious nature of Joffrey's parentage, yes, but also about the secret he had once vowed to Lyanna to keep. Standing near Robert at the wedding feast, Ned wrestled with a growing sense that the realm was sliding into a new conflict. As lively music played and guests drank cup after cup of Arbor Gold, he watched Margaery Tyrell laugh softly at something Renly said. He saw the Tyrell men exchanging glances with Loras, who hovered near Margaery like a silent sentinel. Robert's new queen was forging alliances, weaving a subtle tapestry of influence. And over it all, Cersei Lannister lurked in the shadows of the hall, face pale with hatred. Ned wondered how Robert could possibly keep the peace like this. A new queen meant new court politics. The Tyrells pressed for more power, seats on the small council, prominent court positions for their knights, favorable trade routes for the Reach. Though Robert was mightily grateful for the Tyrell gold and their timely support, he soon chafed under some of their demands. The Boar's attack and his near brush with death had awakened a certain introspection in him, yes, but the king was still the king, still proud, still prone to outbursts when challenged. Margaery herself was no timid maiden. She carried herself with grace, yes, but there were steel nerves beneath the rose-petal exterior and a keen mind as well. She knew how to charm the court, how to make the right compliments to Pycelle, how to flatter Varys, how to quell Littlefinger with a measured threat disguised as a jest. She did it all with a modest smile, never overstepping her bounds, officially. Robert, for his part, watched her with uncertain admiration, uncertain wariness. Sometimes after the day's councils, Ned found the king idly swirling wine in his cup, staring off and muttering. She's too clever by half, that one. But at least she isn't a lion. A tenuous truce held the Red Keep. Cersei and her children remained, but they were no longer recognized as royals. Robert, surprisingly, did not fling them into a dungeon or have them exiled. Perhaps the memory of the boar's tusks haunting his dreams had instilled some flicker of mercy. Or perhaps it was cunning. To cast them out would be to provoke Tywin Lannister into immediate war. As long as the Lannisters waited, Robert had time to rebuild alliances. So Cersei stayed seething. So long as her father Tywin's next move remained uncertain, Robert needed to keep her close. And yet, in these uneasy months, the greatest blow to Northern honor was being forged behind closed doors. Margaery Tyrell had no illusions about the precarious path she walked. If the Lannisters stirred, if war broke out, she needed the king to be more than a drunken brute. She needed him to be a leader who commanded the love of all houses. She had Loras, her beloved brother, and Renly, who championed her at every turn. She had the loyalty of the Tyrell bannermen and quite a portion of the Stormlands thanks to Renly's influence. But she knew that the center of the realm's stability lay in the North's respect for the crown. And Eddard Stark, for all his quiet sense of duty, was not easily bent. He was an honorable man from a line that prided itself on truth and fidelity. To keep the North in line, she needed Ned Stark to compromise. And thus, Margaery Tyrell, in whispered conversations with Varys and Littlefinger, concocted a plan. Queen Margaery approached Ned with a proposition one evening. The king was away from the capital on a short progress to inspect the city's defenses, accompanied by Barristan Selmy and a handful of gold cloaks. In Robert's absence, Margaery ruled from the Red Keep in a caretaker capacity. She summoned Ned to her private solar, where she received him with a gentle, welcoming demeanor. He expected some request for additional ships or men, but her gaze said otherwise. "My Lord Hand," she began softly, "I hope you will not think me bold if I share my private concerns with you." Ned, ever the stoic Northman, gave a slight bow. "I serve at the pleasure of the king, your grace. Speak, and I will do all I can to aid you, as is my duty." Margaery's lips curved, but her eyes were serious. "As you know, House Tyrell has bound itself to the king, but my Lord Father must be convinced that we are not unwise to stand so boldly against House Lannister. My father is protective, and he wants the realm's best as well as mine. The cost of war would be high." Ned inclined his head. "War is the last thing we want. Yet it may come if Tywin Lannister attempts to seat Joffrey by force. We can only prepare." "Yes," she said gravely, "we must prepare. Which is why I am asking if there is a way to ensure that the North stands firm with us. Truly firm. A marriage alliance, perhaps, or something to bind the great families more closely. My father once dreamed that my brother Loras might wed Sansa Stark, but that notion was overshadowed by everything else. Now I wonder if that dream might benefit us all." Ned felt his heart clench. Sansa was still a child of 13. Loras Tyrell was older, admired, shining as the Knight of Flowers, and yet Ned's paternal instincts bristled. "Sansa is quite young, your grace." "So am I," said Margaery quietly. She lowered her gaze. "I was wed to a man older than I, but I do not complain, for it is my duty to ensure the realm's future. One day, I hope we will see Sansa bloom as well, if we can find her a match befitting her station and her potential. My father is not the only one who has expressed interest in forging a bond with House Stark. Others have whispered of a match for Lady Arya or Lady Sansa. We are sure we can find a good arrangement for your daughters." Ned's face was taut. "My daughter is dear to me, your grace. My children are not pieces in a game. Forgive me for speaking plainly." Margaery's expression remained mild. "Your devotion does you credit. But these are dangerous times, Lord Eddard, and your children are highborn. If we do not forge alliances that protect them, they will be used by others in ways far crueler." He said nothing. He knew that was how the game was played in the South. "I will consider your request," he finally said, voice stiff. Margaery inclined her head, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Believe me, my Lord Hand, I want to spare your daughters the horrors that might come if we fail to unite the realm. The Tyrells have no wish for unnecessary bloodshed. If a match can keep the Lannisters from tearing this kingdom apart, then let it happen. But if war is unavoidable, you will need allies to keep the North from burning. I would see the Starks remain the proud wardens of the North, not casualties." Ned left the solar feeling as though he had struck a bargain with a shadow. His sense of honor warred with the pragmatic truth. Sansa was ripe for a southern alliance, and House Tyrell was powerful indeed. The prospect weighed on him day and night. How man? Why times had he promised Catelyn he would protect their children from the snakes of court? And yet, as events pressed on, Ned began to see that refusing the Tyrell overtures might isolate the North, leaving it vulnerable to Lannister wrath if war erupted. The honorable course might be to preserve the realm by forging alliances that prevented mass bloodshed. But was that not the road to moral compromise? The seeds of House Stark's weakening had been sown. Meanwhile, Robert Baratheon returned from his brief progress in a black mood. He had found the city watch poorly organized, the walls in need of repair, the people murmuring about potential war with House Lannister. He drank heavily upon returning, ignoring Margaery's gentle attempts to calm him. Only once they were alone in the king's chambers did he let slip a hint of fear. "Tywin Lannister is waiting," he said darkly. "He's no fool. He's not marched because he wants us to show weakness or make a misstep. The moment we do, he'll strike." Margaery offered soothing words, telling him that her father, Mace, and her formidable grandmother, Lady Olenna, were summoning bannermen in the Reach, that the Tyrell hosts, combined with the Crown's loyal men, could stand against any Lannister aggression. "We only need to ensure that the Riverlands stand with us, and the North," she said. Robert nodded, but he stared at his new wife with solemn eyes. "We can hold them off, yes, but the costs. The realm bleeds when lions and stags wage war." He gave a bitter laugh. "Perhaps if we capture Cersei, Joffrey, and all the Lannisters, we might avoid bloodshed. But it's too late. They are coiled in the Red Keep itself. I'd rather not kill children, even Lannister children." Margaery's eyes flickered at that. "No, we must find another way if possible." In the days that followed, she pressed Robert to finalize alliances, to solidify House Stark's involvement. The king told Ned with uneasy laughter that "this new queen of mine is cunning as a cat, but at least she's straightforward about it." He used Ned's counsel frequently, leaning on the man's judgment. The result was a swirl of proposals for betrothals, pacts, treaties. The Tullys were coaxed into reaffirming ties with the crown. The Arryns remained aloof, but not hostile. Then, in a decisive move, Robert commanded Ned to bring Sansa forth so they might discuss a match with the Tyrells. Ned felt his heart tighten. For days, he had tried to dissuade the king, but Robert was adamant. The king wanted Highgarden fully at ease, and if Margaery's family insisted on an alliance with the Starks, Robert saw no harm in letting Sansa be betrothed to Ser Loras or another worthy Tyrell cousin. "It's not as if the girl will be wed tomorrow," Robert said dismissively. "She's only to be promised. After all, that is how it's done, Ned." So it was done. With Catelyn Stark's reluctant approval, she who had once wanted Sansa betrothed to Joffrey in those more innocent days. The arrangement was sealed. A public announcement was made at a feast in the Red Keep. Sansa was trembling, her eyes brimming with uncertain tears, though she tried to appear radiant and polite. Loras Tyrell knelt and kissed her hand. There was applause, forced and cautious in equal measure. And from a distant corner of the hall, Cersei watched with narrowed eyes. As Ned Stark saw the faint smile on Margaery's lips, something within him twisted. He had ensured the realm gained a strong alliance. He had done his duty to preserve peace. But in doing so, he had chipped away at the ideal of Stark independence. Sansa was now a piece in the game. This was but the first toll of the bell that would ring in the North's sense of betrayal. For though Ned never spoke it aloud, many of his bannermen quietly complained that their liege lord was bending too far to southern demands. Rumors flew that the king had discovered the Lannisters' secret but had turned it into a personal power grab. Ned Stark, they said, might well have played a role in disinheriting Joffrey. The North remembers, said some of the older lords, eyeing events with suspicion. Others recalled the era of Targaryen rule, how the North had always demanded some measure of respect. Now, their beloved Lord Eddard was dancing a southern jig at the behest of House Tyrell, or so the gossip went. The first cracks began to show in the foundation of Stark honor as the strain of these alliances tested Ned's moral certainties. Catelyn tried to reassure him that it was for the good of Sansa that it protected them from Lannister vengeance. But Ned felt an ache in his chest that would not abate. Amid these tensions, the realm braced for Tywin Lannister's next move. When it came, it was as cunning and brutal as all feared. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, rode at the head of a column of Lannister knights from the west, visiting minor houses loyal to the crown, seizing storehouses, and demanding they recognize Joffrey as the true heir. Raventree Hall was sacked in an unexpected show of force. Lord Blackwood, outraged, sent ravens to King's Landing, calling for retribution. Robert's face purpled with anger when he read the missives. "Treason," he thundered. "The Lannisters defy me openly." Here was the spark. Men muttered that war was upon them. Robert demanded that Tywin produce Jaime for justice, or he himself would lead an army west to subdue them. Margaery Tyrell insisted that if it came to open war, House Tyrell would stand with the king. Then from the north came new entreaties. The Stark bannermen were uneasy but loyal so long as Ned Stark commanded them. War beckoned. Eddard tried to counsel caution, sending ravens to Tywin. But the old lion of Casterly Rock replied with a short, chilling letter in which he dismissed Robert's marriage to Margaery as invalid nonsense and declared that the rightful queen was Cersei, her son Joffrey the rightful heir. So it was done. Lines were drawn. It was decided that Robert Baratheon would march west with a host from the Reach and the Crownlands. Stannis Baratheon would raise ships on the Narrow Sea to blockade Lannisport if it came to that. Renly would stay behind, ensuring the safety of the Red Keep. Ned Stark was torn: should he remain in King's Landing to keep the peace, or march with Robert as the hand of the king? Margaery gently pressed him to remain, for fear that leaving Cersei in the capital was unwise, but Robert insisted he needed Ned's counsel on the field. The tension was resolved when Margaery herself volunteered to stay in the city in the king's stead, acting as regent, though she was newlywed. Robert balked at first, but she convinced him she could manage the affairs of court alongside Renly and the small council. Ned would ride with the king, leading a portion of the crown's forces as well as some northern men under the Stark banner. So began the march of the king's host, 100 knights of the King's Guard and the City Watch, 3,000 Tyrell men under the banners of the Rose, 2,000 Stormland knights who had rallied to Renly but now marched under the king's command, and a scattering of lesser lords who hoped to curry favor by joining. Outwardly, Robert appeared in command. Inwardly, the near-fatal Boar wound still pained him, and he rode more stiffly than he once had. Barristan Selmy and Eddard Stark frequently found him short of breath, but the king insisted on pushing forward. "If I can swing a hammer once more, I'll do it at Tywin's skull," Robert declared. They encountered Lannister outriders near the borders of the Riverlands. Skirmishes ensued. Word came that Jaime Lannister had sacked another holdfast, carrying off supplies. The Tullus, led by Edmure in Hoster Tully's stead, opened Riverrun's gates to welcome Robert's host. There, by the banks of the Red Fork, the king held a war council. The plan: trap Jaime's roving band between Riverrun's levies and the king's larger army while Stannis's fleet threatened Lannisport from the sea. Meanwhile, they sent riders north to ensure Walder Frey would not betray them and to gather any northern men who might bolster the cause. Robert's mood swung between grim determination and ill-tempered rages. Sometimes, in the hush of the night, Ned found him brooding at the map of the West, muttering about Rhaegar Targaryen, about the ghosts that haunted him. "I've always defined myself by war," Robert said one evening, the faint torchlight casting hollows in his cheeks. "But what did war bring me? A throne, a marriage to a lioness, illusions of peace. Perhaps the gods are punishing me for my youthful pride. They gave me a second chance, let me live, and now I do the same damn thing again, raising banners, forging alliances. Another war. Have I learned nothing?" He looked at Ned with haunted eyes. "If I die on the battlefield, promise me one thing: keep the realm from tearing itself apart." Ned nodded, the vow sitting heavy on his heart. "I will try, my friend." But he thought of Catelyn and his children, Robb, Bran, Rickon, Arya, Sansa, and wondered if he could keep such a promise without sacrificing more of his honor. The war did not explode into a grand pitched battle. Instead, it lurched forward in half a dozen minor engagements and cunning maneuvers. Jaime Lannister, outnumbered, withdrew to Harrenhal, seeking to use the fortress's dread reputation and strategic position to stall. Tywin advanced from the west with a larger force, aiming perhaps to link up with Jaime or to lure the king deeper into the Riverlands. On the southern flank, Mace Tyrell's bannermen pressed upward, closing the roads behind Jaime. Tension mounted daily. Then, in a stroke, Tywin Lannister outplayed them, demonstrating how he had earned his fearsome reputation. While the king's host was engaged in skirmishes near the God's Eye, Tywin bypassed them with a swift forced march, swept into the western Riverlands, and struck at areas the king had left unprotected. Villages burned. The Tully banners struggled to respond. Robert's eyes blazed with fury when scouts brought word of Tywin's rampage. "He means to bait me," Robert snapped. "He wants to make me chase him." Yet the king could not stand by while Tully lands burned. Thus he ordered a full pivot. The entire royal army would turn west and confront Tywin directly before he reached the deeper valleys that would let him slip away to Casterly Rock. The forced march left many men exhausted. Rain fell in sheets on their second day of maneuver. Horses struggled through muddy fields. Barristan Selmy, quiet but vigilant, tried to caution the king to wait out the storm, but Robert insisted they push on. Ned began to fear that the king's old wound might open. He saw the pallor on Robert's face, the lines of pain. Yet Robert pressed forward, cursing Tywin's name at every step. They finally confronted Tywin's vanguard near the ruins of some old holdfast. The fighting was fierce. Ned took the field with the king's guard, exchanging sword blows with Lannister men. The king himself, astride a warhorse clad in Baratheon black, bellowed a war cry that stung the memory of the Trident. But Tywin's men were disciplined. They fell back in good order, leading the king's forces deeper into uncertain ground. Then they turned. Trumpets sounded across the field. Suddenly, Ned realized there were more Lannister knights than they'd assumed. They appeared from behind a ridge, red banners snapping, flanking the king's line. Chaos erupted. In the swirl of combat, Ned glimpsed Jaime Lannister's golden hair shining as he drove a wedge through Tyrell spearmen. Barristan and Selmy fought valiantly, trying to keep Robert from being surrounded. And through it all, Ned fought as well, wearing the direwolf sigil, knowing that House Stark's honor was at stake. If Robert fell here, all the bargains and compromises Ned had made would be for naught. He pressed forward, slashing at a knight with a lion on his surcoat, parrying desperately. The day's outcome hung in the balance, but the king's determination proved formidable. Robert refused to retreat, summoning the same unyielding spirit that had fueled him at the Trident. With a final push, they broke the Lannister line, forcing Jaime to withdraw. Tywin, seeing that a full rout was impossible with the king's fresh reserves arriving, ordered a controlled retreat. The field was left to the crown's forces. A nominal victory, but the cost in lives was high. Among the wounded was Ned Stark, who had taken a nasty cut to his thigh, though fortunately it was not mortal. He was carried to a makeshift maester's tent, cursing his own foolishness in letting the Lannisters lure them into such a desperate fight. Robert, battered but upright, came to see him, blood still spattered across the antlers on his breastplate. "You'll live," the king said, relief in his voice. "I need you, Ned." "And I you," Ned replied, though pain lanced his leg. The royal army was in no shape for further pursuit, battered and bruised. Tywin had escaped with the remnants of his host. The seeds of a prolonged war had been planted, with neither side able to land a decisive blow. Ravens were sent to King's Landing, carrying news of the battle. Ned prayed the city held together in Robert's absence, that Margaery Tyrell's regency had prevented chaos. Yet a gnawing worry clutched him. What if Cersei had made some move in the king's absence? Days passed as they licked their wounds. Word came that the Riverlords, outraged by Tywin's rampages, were more firmly than ever on the king's side. Meanwhile, the Lannisters had consolidated near the Golden Tooth, fortifying the passes to the west. Winter was creeping closer, the nights cold. Ned realized that if the war dragged into deep winter, the realm would starve. He pressed Robert to sue for a truce, but the king refused, not after seeing the devastation in the Riverlands. "I'll have Tywin's head for this," Robert growled. "I'll not parley with traitors." Thus the war ground on, a slow, grinding affair. Raids, feints, fortress sieges. The Lannisters threatened to strike at unsuspecting lords who wore the stag or rose upon their banners. The crown's forces moved to counter them. Small folk suffered, as always. Ned often lay awake at night, thinking of how all his concessions, all the fracturing of his pure northern honor, had led them here with no end in sight. In the quiet of his tent, he would recall the old words, "War was easier than daughters." Now he had both to contend with, and it was all for a friend who had survived a boar's tusk and refused to let sleeping lions lie. Meanwhile, Margaery Tyrell's rule in King's Landing as regent took root. She convened daily councils with Renly Baratheon, Varys, Littlefinger, and Pycelle. She reigned in the gold cloaks, ensuring they remained loyal. She used Tyrell gold to placate restless merchants. She made sure bread reached the hungry, thereby winning the love of the small folk. But her real test came when Cersei Lannister openly accused the Tyrell queen of seducing the king under false pretenses and threatened to claim the regency for herself in Robert's absence. Margaery responded not with rage or condemnation, but with calm reproof. She had the faith behind her, the High Septon who had presided over her marriage. She had the official decree naming her regent, and she had the city watch. Cersei's attempt fizzled, and the Queen Dowager was forced to remain behind the walls of her own suite, seething in impotence. Joffrey, overshadowed by Lannister misfortune, stewed alongside her, refused by every noble in the city. In that climate, Tywin Lannister's old game of sowing discontent found no easy purchase. He had hoped that the city's people might revolt at the notion of another queen. Instead, they found Margaery kind, generous, mindful of their needs. Word of her good deeds spread among the small folk. If this war dragged on, Margaery seemed determined to hold the capital securely. Yet the cost of feeding so many was rising. Debts mounted. Littlefinger rubbed his fingers together, whispering of the crown's precarious finances. But Margaery borrowed from the Iron Bank of Bravos in the king's name, determined that no bread lines would run empty while she reigned in King's Landing. And so House Stark found itself ever more entangled. For who would repay those debts if the king's gold ran short? Ned's misgivings deepened. The year turned, and the war continued in fits and starts. Skirmishes near the Gold Road. Pyromancers in the city forging wildfire just in case. Robert marched from one castle to another, always just missing Tywin. Rumors emerged that Tywin's approach to King's Landing had been stymied by Margaery's vigilance. But Tywin was rumored to be forging new alliances with certain houses in the Reach that quietly resented Tyrell rule. Another year of conflict loomed. Men bled, crops were burned. Rumors of bandits turned the roads dangerous. The realm's chaos deepened. Sometimes Ned Stark reflected that if Robert had died from that boar's tusk, it might have been kinder to the realm, for all these horrors might have been avoided. Or perhaps they would have been worse under Joffrey's questionable claim. Such questions churned in him, leaving him drained. And so came the final blow to Ned Stark's faith. It happened when an envoy from the north arrived at the king's war camp, a tall, bearded man named Hally's Hornwood, battered from weeks of travel. He brought dire news that the Ironborn were raiding the Stony Shore, seizing villages left poorly defended. The watchtowers near Deepwood Motte were threatened. Lady Donella Hornwood pleaded for immediate assistance from Winterfell. Ned's heart froze at the news. The North was under attack, and here he was, squandering northern resources in a southern war. He had no easy path to return. If he left the king's side, House Stark might be accused of desertion. But if he stayed, the Ironborn would ravage the coasts. Ned went to Robert with the letter in hand, heart in his throat. "We must send men north at once," he said, voice stern. "The Ironborn have grown bold again." Robert, seated on a low camp stool, face flushed with anger at some other misfortune of the war, barely looked up. "I'm sorry, Ned, but we need every spear here to keep Tywin from marching on King's Landing. If the Ironborn are stirring, can your son Robb not handle it? He's near manhood, is he not?" Ned blinked in disbelief. "He is only 15. He needs guidance. He's not ready to command a host alone." Robert scowled. "Then let him lean on your castellan or the bannermen. The north is vast, the Ironborn can only harry the coasts. We can't spare the men to send you back, not if Tywin might strike at any moment. Our fortunes in this war are fragile enough." A cold dread filled Ned. "My lord, the north is my duty, and the realm is mine," Robert thundered, standing so quickly he sent the stool clattering. "Seven hells, Ned, we stand on a knife's edge here. I won't let Tywin run rampant because my best commander scurried north at the first sign of Ironborn raiders. See to it from afar if you must, but I need you here, gods damn it." Ned inhaled slowly, trying to master his anger. He recalled how once, in their youth, Robert's passions had seemed glorious, leading them in rebellion, forging a new era. Now he saw the cost. This was a man who had survived death once, so single-minded about preserving his rule that he would let parts of the realm burn rather than risk losing a critical advantage. Ned realized, with a bitter taste in his mouth, that the king was so consumed with the war against Tywin that the North's troubles fell to second place. "Very well," Ned murmured at last, though his heart rebelled. "I will do as you command." He left the king's presence with halting steps, leaning on a cane still needed for his injured leg. Outside, the autumn winds cut cold, a foretaste of winter. The flaps of the royal pavilion rustled as he emerged. Men paused their chores, bowing as he passed. He hardly saw them. In that moment, Ned Stark felt a profound sense of betrayal, not only by Robert, but by himself. He had bartered away pieces of Stark independence to secure alliances to keep the realm whole. Now his own homeland needed him, and he was pinned down in a southern war, forced to let the North fend for itself. That was the cost of his choices. And so, when Hally's Hornwood stood before him, eyes full of urgency, Ned could only muster a meager reassurance. "Send word to my son at Winterfell," Ned said. "Tell him he must gather the bannermen near Deepwood Motte. I can offer little else from here. The king forbids me to leave this war." He heard the shame in his own voice. The messenger's face reflected disappointment, though he nodded. "Yes, my lord." The next day, Ned wrote letters to Winterfell urging Robb to consult with Roose Bolton, Wyman Manderley, and other lords. He prayed they might repel the Ironborn without his direct command. Each word pained him. This was not how it should have been, he thought. The Warden of the North, shackled by the whims of Southern war. He could see the seeds of trouble. Robb was young, new to command. The bannermen might doubt him. Some might blame Ned for forcing them to fight a Southern war while the North was left vulnerable. Nights in the camp grew colder. The weeks dragged. The Lannister host lurked behind strong defenses. Margaery Tyrell wrote frequent letters to Robert, urging caution and telling him how the city fared. She continued to rule ably, forging new deals with the guilds. At times, Ned wondered if the new queen might be a better ruler than the king himself. But that was treasonous thinking, so he banished it. Instead, he plodded onward, taking each day as it came. By the time a new year was upon them, the war had settled into stalemate. Jaime Lannister, caged in the west, made no progress, yet refused to give ground. Tywin watched for any sign of weakness. Meanwhile, in the north, the Ironborn had taken several fishing villages. Reports of chaos trickled down. Robb was trying, apparently, to muster enough force to drive them back, but winter snows threatened to slow his campaign. Ned's letters grew more urgent. In the back of his mind, the question loomed, was the war in the west worth losing parts of the north? That question was tested when rumor reached them that Tywin Lannister might attempt a direct approach through the Riverlands once more. The king braced for a major battle. Hours before they were to march, Ned received another raven from Winterfell, this one sealed with his son's private sigil. He broke the seal, scanning the contents as his heart hammered. "Father, I have driven the Ironborn from Deepwood Motte, but losses are grievous. Great John Umber is wounded. The Ironborn continue to raid the coast. I beg you, return to command our forces or grant me the authority to raise every banner. If we do not act swiftly, the Ironborn will carve out strongholds. The men question why we bleed for a southern war while our own homes burn. We must act as one North or we risk losing all." "Robb." Ned looked up from the letter, face taut. He walked directly into the king's tent, ignoring the startled guards. Robert was there with Ser Barristan, reviewing a map. "Ned, what is the meaning of—" "I am going north," Ned said sharply, trembling with suppressed anger. "I will not abandon my people to raids and plunder while we chase Tywin Lannister across the Riverlands. I've done my duty here beyond measure, Robert. Let me see to my own lands." Robert's face went red. Barristan took a step back, uncertain. "Gods be good, Ned, not this again. I told you, I need you. Tywin might strike a decisive blow any day." Ned met the king's gaze, his voice heavy. "Then strike your blow without me. I am Warden of the North. If you forbid me, I'll no longer be a man of honor in my own land." Those words hung in the still air. For a moment, Ned believed Robert might explode, might clap him in irons. Then the king's shoulders slumped in exhaustion. He closed his eyes, nodding with a weary acceptance. "Go," Robert said, voice hollow. "Go if you must. But damn you for leaving me in my hour of need." Ned bowed stiffly. "I'm sorry, my friend. But the North has needs as well." And so Ned Stark parted from Robert Baratheon's host. He took a contingent of northern knights who had journeyed south with him. They rode hard for Moat Cailin. The travel took weeks, fraught with the threat of Lannister outriders harrying them. But they slipped past the main lines and found the roads that led north. Upon his return to the north, Ned saw the devastation wrought by Ironborn raids. Smoldering villages, stores pillaged, families scattered. Winterfell itself was untouched, but fear ran through the region. Robb, young and grim, greeted his father with palpable relief, but also with a new hardness in his eyes. "They say you'll not come," Robb murmured. "That you were pledged to the new queen's cause." Ned's heart twisted at those words. He realized how far the seeds of doubt had spread. "I'm here now," he said, voice low. "We will drive them away." He took command, forging a plan to strike the Ironborn at Sea Dragon Point and along the rills. The northern bannermen responded. Yet Ned could sense the shift. In quiet corners, men muttered that their lord had put the king's southern war first, that the north had suffered for it. They still respected Ned, but the unwavering love they had once borne him had been shaken. "The North remembers," some said darkly, a phrase that once signified stark loyalty but was beginning to carry a note of accusation. Under Ned's leadership, the Ironborn were driven from the shore, forced back to their ships. The Northern Navy, small though it was, found some measure of success harrying their longships. Victories came with cost. More men died, more resources lost. But within 2 months, the threat was contained. Word reached Winterfell that King Robert was still in the field, the war in the west an ongoing stalemate. Margaery Tyrell continued to rule in King's Landing, her hold firm, while Cersei nursed her fury. So ended one chapter of the realm's troubles. But the realm was hardly at peace. Ned Stark stood upon the battlements of Winterfell, gazing out at the wide northern expanse. Winter was indeed coming. He could feel it in the wind. He had upheld his oath to Robert, had marched south as Hand of the King, had bound his own daughter to a Tyrell betrothal, had compromised again and again. And in doing so, he had left the north vulnerable, only barely arriving in time to push back the Ironborn. The simmering resentment among his bannermen might take years to fade, if it ever did. This was the wound to Stark honor, that their own liege lord had placed the realm's politics over the immediate defense of the north, all for the sake of that precarious seat in the Red Keep. Days after the Ironborn threat subsided, Catelyn came to him in the Godswood. She had the look of worry etched upon her face, lined by sleepless nights. Ned held her hand in silence for a moment, hearing the quiet ripple of the Weirwood's pool. She said, "Word came from King's Landing. Margaery Tyrell is with child." He blinked, the news weighing on him. An heir for Robert, one that might seal the Tyrell alliance forever. "May the gods grant it health," he said quietly. Catelyn's voice trembled. "This means the Tyrells will only tighten their hold on the throne. Where does that leave us, Ned? Will Robert even return to King's Landing soon? Or will he remain in the field while the realm strains under war's weight? And what of Sansa? The betrothal stands, but the wedding date looms nearer each passing season. We have no say in it now. The Tyrells will want her in Highgarden, to raise her in their ways." Ned closed his eyes. He could almost see the sweet face of his daughter, how she had once dreamed of being a queen or a lady in faraway courts. Did she still dream those bright dreams? Or had she learned the cynicism that came with war? "It is the cost of my choices," he said dully. "I only hope Sansa does not come to hate me for it." They stood under the heart tree's crimson leaves, both consumed by quiet regret. The scar of Ned's compromise was not only in the realm's chaos but in his own heart, in the knowledge that his fatherly vow to protect his children from the worst of southern intrigues had been slowly eroded. In truth, Ned realized, the seeds of that erosion were planted years ago when Robert first took the throne and named him friend. Catelyn laid her head on his shoulder. "We will endure," she whispered. "We must. Winter may come, but the Starks remain." Ned nodded, but he wondered what condition they would be in when spring returned, if it ever did. In the months that followed, letters from the south trickled in. The war was neither won nor lost, still wearing down both sides. The realm bled, Tywin's pride unbroken, Robert's fury unquenched. Within the Red Keep, Margaery Tyrell presided over a rigid but effective regency, ensuring the Gold Cloaks stayed loyal. Cersei remained a sullen presence, overshadowed by the new queen, but no one dared to forcibly remove her for fear of provoking Tywin. Sansa Stark still lived at the Red Keep, effectively a ward of the crown as the betrothed of Loras Tyrell. She wrote to her mother of her new lessons in courtesy, in dancing, in the heraldry of the Reach. She sounded grateful for the queen's attention. Yet Ned read her words with a father's worry, sensing her yearning for home hidden between the lines. It was a precarious equilibrium. The seasons turned. News of a fresh Lannister offensive in the Riverlands broke the quiet. Tully forces reeled. Again, King Robert was forced to muster what battered men he had left. Ned, in Winterfell, found himself caught in a vice of loyalties. He had returned north, turned back the Ironborn, and restored a measure of peace. But winter snows were falling heavily now, blanketing the roads. Travel was perilous. How could he respond to Robert's call for reinforcements? Could he risk leading another host south when the north might be threatened again from the sea? His bannermen, newly returned from the last campaign, would balk at riding to a distant war. In the end, Ned sent a carefully worded raven to Robert, telling him that heavy snow made the path south impossible until spring. Apologies, regrets, but no men could be spared from the north with Ironborn raids still a threat. The letter was honest, but it was also a final blow to the illusions that House Stark would forever stand at the king's side. The alliance was there by law, but the old closeness was lost. Ned waited for the king's angry reply, but none came. Perhaps Robert had grown so weary that even rage failed him. The final rumor came from traveling merchants as winter's cloak grew heavier. The Tyrell queen had given birth to a son. A healthy boy, golden brown hair and bright eyes. The line of Baratheon Tyrell had begun. The city rejoiced in relief that an heir had come at last, untainted by Lannister scandal. Margaery was hailed as the rose that renewed the land, though war still raged. With a true heir in the cradle, Robert's position on the throne seemed more secure than ever, at least in the eyes of the small folk. Yet the Lannisters still refused to yield. In distant Lannisport, Tywin hoarded resources and the war might continue for years. And far to the north, Eddard Stark stood on the walls of Winterfell, snow drifting around him. He watched his sons spar in the courtyard. Robb, though older, practicing moves with Bran, who had insisted on training despite his youth. Rickon toddled about, enthralled by the swirling flakes. This was home, this was family. And yet all Ned could feel was the weight of all he had sacrificed to keep them safe. Sansa was betrothed to a Tyrell, so very far away, learning the ways of King's Landing. Arya was a restless spirit he feared he could not keep caged much longer. Robb was growing into a war leader too young, forced by necessity. The scars of House Stark's involvement in the southern conflict would not be easily erased. It was a cold day and the weirwood in the god would seem to whisper with the faint wind. Ned could almost imagine that it spoke of the past, of old promises and regrets. He thought of his sister Lyanna, how her tragic end had set Robert on the throne, how that single spark had lit a fire that still burned. If Robert had died by that boar's tusk, perhaps the realm would have fractured differently, maybe Cersei would have unleashed horrors, or maybe another war of succession would have begun. Instead, Robert lived and the realm was torn just the same, only in a slower, more convoluted fashion. The Starks were forced to bow to the Tyrell's ambitions, to watch as a new queen tightened her hold on the Iron Throne. Eddard had survived the blade of war only to be cut by the edges of compromise. The day drew on and Ned Stark retreated inside with his family. The hall was warm, the hearth fires blazing, the smell of bread filling the air. It was a small comfort. Outside, the snows kept falling, a hush across the land. The war was far away, but not gone. Down in King's Landing, the great game continued. As night fell, Ned prayed before the hearth for the soul of Robert Baratheon. But a deeper, more silent prayer rose for the souls of the North, for he feared their trust in House Stark had been shaken and that would take more than one winter to mend. So the story closed on this chapter of What If, with Robert Baratheon living on, wed to Margaery Tyrell, forging new lines of power that kept the Lannisters at bay but left the realm in a protracted struggle, a slow bleed of men and resources. House Stark, once proud and aloof in its honor, had been forced to bend in ways that left it uncertain and compromised, its rightful obligations to its own people delayed by a king's demands and the swirl of southern alliances. Whether the final cost was worth that moment of survival beneath a boar's tusk was a question that no man could answer, not even Eddard Stark, whose quiet prayers echoed through Winterfell's long night, hoping for spring to bring some respite to a wounded realm. Ned Stark stood atop the walls of Winterfell, cloaked against the deepening cold, and gazed over the courtyard where his sons sparred. The clang of wood on steel echoed through the yard, an oddly comforting sound, even if his eyes lingered with concern on Robb, who had been forced to shoulder the burdens of command too soon. Winter's chill settled upon the north more each day, swirling flakes painting the ramparts in ghostly white. The last letter Ned had received from King's Landing lay heavy in his mind. Queen Margaery had written of new efforts at peace, of the city's relief that the war had not yet spilled fully into the Crownlands, and of the child she had borne for King Robert, a son named Steffan after Robert's father, a gesture that had charmed many of the old Baratheon bannermen. And yet the war raged on all the same, slow and grinding, devouring the Riverlands and men's hopes alike. The North had been battered by Ironborn raids, but Ned's return and the swift mobilization of the Northern bannermen had driven the raiders back to their ships. Those who had not drowned or fled had been executed under the watch of Robb's outraged lords. Now the men of the north returned to their farms and keeps, anxious to see if the winter snows would soon deepen. A half-year ago, Ned would never have believed he would abandon King Robert's cause on the western battlefields. But the north was his responsibility first. The tension between that duty and his vow to the king still pricked his conscience with every breath. He made his way down from the battlements, the old familiar stones beneath his feet. Beneath the gray winter light, everything seemed sharper, from the color of the snow to the crispness of the morning air. He had always found a certain solace in Winterfell's timeless presence. Yet that day, as he reached the yard and approached Robb and Bran, he felt not solace but the persistent ache of worry. Robb was calling out instructions to Bran, who was stoutly doing his best to parry the older boy's swings. Summer and gray wind, the dire wolves circled at a distance, tongues lolling in the cold air. Robb glanced over, pausing at once to bow his head. "Father," he said. His voice was deeper than it had been mere months ago, and Ned saw the faint stubble on his cheeks, the lines of exhaustion under his eyes. Robb had not been sleeping well, so the maester had said. Bran stopped too, blinking in relief at the reprieve. "Father," he echoed, all boyish hope and earnestness. "Do you want to watch our forms?" Ned managed a small smile, though it felt tight at the edges. "I do, but not now. I need to speak with Robb." He placed a hand gently on Bran's shoulder. "Well done, my boy. Keep your guard high." That made the younger Stark grin, and he gave a nod before he trotted off, calling Summer to his side. Robb handed his wooden practice sword to a waiting stable hand. "Has there been more word from the south?" he asked, heading with Ned to an alcove near the archery butts, a half-sheltered corner out of the wind. A hush fell around them as they stepped aside, men-at-arms giving them a wide berth out of respect. "Only a letter from the Queen," Ned said gravely. "King Robert presses westward still. Hostilities continue near the Golden Tooth and in the lower Riverlands. The word is that Tywin Lannister has refused all offers of truce. They've had multiple skirmishes, each side claiming small victories but gaining little." Robb shifted his weight. "Will the king call on the north again? We've only just driven away the Ironborn. Many of our men would not welcome another southern summons." Ned exhaled a visible breath into the cold air. "I suspect he would if the snows were not so fierce. Margaery's letter mentions that the king understands our predicament. He knows sending men south in the heart of winter might be an invitation to disaster. But I worry that come spring, the realm will once again demand our swords." Robb studied his father's face carefully. "We have seen the cost already. Men have died in the Riverlands, men have died along our coasts, and for what? The Lannisters have not yielded, and the Tyrell alliance has only dragged the fighting on." He hesitated. "Do you regret, father, that you helped King Robert disinherit the Lannisters?" Ned's jaw tightened. "I do not regret exposing the truth about Cersei's children if indeed they were not Robert's seed." He paused, thoughts clouded. "But I do regret the way war has bled the realm. Sometimes I wonder if Robert's survival that day was a blessing or a curse. Yet the gods do not give us the power to choose such fates." He thought of the day he had confronted Robert, demanding to return to the north. The friend he once knew had stared back with anger and sorrow in his eyes, parted from him with a harsh word of farewell. Now half the realm scorned the Lannisters, while the other half cursed the king's intransigence. The small folk from the Riverlands to the Westerlands paid the steepest price. Robb lowered his gaze. "We do what we must. The North will stand by us, so long as we do not bring their men to ruin for a southern quarrel that seems never to end." Ned placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. "I know. Ut do not speak of it as though it is only a southern quarrel. The Iron Throne and the Seven Kingdoms connect us all. Even here, if we sever that tie, the realm splinters. King Robert once led us to freedom from the Mad King. If we turn our backs on him entirely, the Lannisters will not forget. Nor will the Tyrells." Robb shook his head. "I understand, but we must weigh carefully what we can afford to give. Winter is looming, father." His eyes flicked to the sky, thick with gray clouds. "We must see to our own land first." Ned nodded and let the silence settle, the frigid wind ruffling their cloaks. Then he said, "Come, walk with me. We should hear Maester Luwin's latest reports on the roads. And you must tell me more of your battles against the Ironborn. I want to know everything. My son is no longer a green boy, it seems." Robb gave a faint smile. "It was not my doing alone. The great John Roose Bolton and others led men by my side. I only wish we had not lost so many." Their footsteps crunched over the frosty ground as they went. Ned resisted the urge to rest a fatherly arm around Robb's shoulder, sensing that his boy, half a man grown, would prefer to show his own stride. Overhead, snow clouds turned the sky to pewter, a far cry from the bright sun that had once glinted off the waters of the Trident when Ned and Robert had fought side by side in the rebellion. So many years ago, he thought. So many regrets. They reached Maester Luwin in the library tower, where the old man was huddled over a table spread with parchment maps. A brazier burned warmly, giving the chamber a smoky smell. Luwin adjusted his chain and rose as they entered. "My lord," he said softly, bowing to father and son, "I have new tidings from the south. A raven arrived not long ago." Ned felt his heart tighten. More word of the war? Yes, word from Riverrun. Luwin beckoned them closer to the table. Edmure Tully's men have had a fierce clash with Lannister outriders near the Red Fork. Casualties are high on both sides. Ser Brynden the Blackfish is said to have commanded the Tully forces with skill, but they could not break the Lannister lines. The letter says that Tywin's host continues to lurk, seeking a chance to strike deeper into the Riverlands. Meanwhile, the king is pinned in a standoff near the hills south of the Gold Road. Ned nodded gravely. So Tywin hasn't marched on King's Landing. He wants to bleed the Riverlands, force the crown to come to him, or lure Robert into a trap. Likely, said Luwin. There is one more matter. Lady Catelyn's brother, Edmure, requests that you reconsider dispatching any northern reinforcements. But from the tone of the letter, he must realize the snows make that difficult. Ned glanced at Robb, whose mouth was set in a grim line. We can't muster more men unless we wish them to starve on the roads, Robb said quietly. If the snows abate in spring, perhaps. Ned finished the thought. Then we may ride. But in the meantime, the Tullys suffer, as do the local smallfolk. If we do nothing, the Riverlands will be ravaged for another year or more. In the hush, Ned recalled how Catelyn had told him stories of her youth along the Red Fork, the fish-laden waters, the orchard trees in bloom. War would reduce that to char and cinders. He felt a pang of guilt. Yet he knew the North could not easily save them, not after the Ironborn raids and the onset of winter. He rubbed a hand across his brow, turning to Luwin. Send a raven to Riverrun. Tell them we cannot commit more swords until the worst of winter passes. Offer what counsel we can, express our regrets, and reaffirm our loyalty to the Tullys. That is the best we can do for now. Luwin bowed his head. As you say, my lord. Robb's eyes flickered. They might see it as abandonment. Ned took a breath. We must pray they understand. They are my wife's kin and your mother's, but we cannot conjure men out of the snow. The king forced our hand months ago, and we cannot press our banners to ruin. This realm might tear itself apart before spring. If it does, the North must be strong enough to weather it. He thanked Luwin, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as he turned to leave. Robb accompanied him, footsteps echoing on the stone stairs descending from the library tower. As they made their way to the Great Hall, Ned glimpsed workers preparing for the dusk meal. A few scullions whispered and cast anxious glances. The entire castle seemed on edge these days, as if waiting for a blow that never quite fell. They passed Arya near the hall's entrance, engaged in an animated conversation with her friend Jane Poole. Arya's gray eyes caught Ned's, and she broke off whatever jest she was making to approach, curiosity burning in her face. She wore a warm tunic and breeches, a short practice sword belted at her side. Ned tried not to show disapproval. He had accepted that Arya would never be the demure Lady Sansa once dreamed of being. He also noted how tall she had grown, her face losing some of its childish roundness, replaced by a serious determination beyond her years. Father, she said, any news from Sansa? Ned's breath caught. Sansa was far away in King's Landing, a betrothed to a Tyrell Ser Loras, or, as some said, another Tyrell cousin. Officially, the arrangement was with Loras, but there had been talk that Margaery and her grandmother, Lady Olenna, might shift the match to a more distant Tyrell if it suited them. Ned had received only polite, carefully written letters from Sansa. She's well, he answered, voice gentling. The last letter said she is learning how to dance in the southern style and is a companion to Queen Margaery at court. She writes that she is safe. Arya frowned. Safe in the midst of war? How safe can she be? And she must have Lannisters lurking around every corner. Robb laid a hand lightly on Arya's arm to calm her. We have no reason to think she's in danger. The Tyrells have the city in their grip. The Lannisters within the Red Keep are overshadowed by the Queen's men, or so the letters say. Arya glared at the floor. She used to talk so much about becoming a queen or a lady in a great castle. I wonder if she's found it to her liking. A flicker of sorrow crossed her features. Then she squared her shoulders and nodded to them both. I'll see you at supper, she said, and turned away briskly, calling out to Jane with a voice that tried to hide her worry. Ned watched her go, mind drifting to Sansa's letters. He recalled the flowery language, the carefully chosen compliments for Queen Margaery. Between the lines, he had seen a subtle longing for home. Or perhaps he only saw what he expected. She is strong, he murmured. Robb said nothing, but his expression darkened. The fracturing of their family weighed on them all. They entered the great hall where tables were being set, hounds prowling underfoot in search of scraps. At the high table, Catelyn Stark was already seated conferring with the steward. When she spotted Ned and Robb, her face lit with relief. She had spent hours that day in the Solar, receiving visiting lords and ladies from the northern countryside who came to Winterfell seeking some resolution for lost lands, missing kin, or disputes that had arisen during the Ironborn raids. Each new complaint was a sign of the realm's greater chaos. Her auburn hair was touched by flickers of gray near the temples, now a subtle sign of the stress she carried. Still, her bearing remained poised. As Ned and Robb approached, she dismissed the steward. "My lords," she said softly. "You both look troubled." "Bad news from Riverrun," Ned explained, leaning in to brush a gentle kiss upon her cheek. "The Tullus are still besieged by Lannister raids." Her eyes flickered with sorrow. "Per Edmure, my father's health continues to decline, and the burden of leadership falls to him." "Do they beseech us for help?" "They do," Ned confirmed. "But I've sent Lewin to draft a reply stating it's impossible until the snows relent. If we march now, we'd lose half our men to the elements before we ever saw the Lannisters." Catelyn bowed her head, hands clasped. "We can only pray for their endurance. At least the king is fighting there, or near enough." Ned nodded. "Yes, Robert holds the field, though the fighting has turned into a stalemate. And Tywin has no taste for a direct assault on King's Landing. Not while Margaery Tyrell is entrenched with the City Watch and, apparently, the High Septon." Catelyn gave a wry, tired smile. "Queen Margaery is cunning indeed. She sends me letters now and then. Always polite, always praising the virtues of unity. She includes little lines about Sansa's lessons and how kind Sansa is to her ladies. And yet I read in them how thoroughly she controls the court. Not even Cersei can wrest that power away." "Perhaps that is for the best," said Ned. "Better Margaery than Cersei. If Joffrey had his mother's power behind him, the city would be chaos." Robb made a quiet sound of assent. "True, though I wonder how secure Margaery can remain if the war drags on for years. The realm may fracture more deeply." Catelyn sighed, and the three of them stood close in an unspoken moment of shared weariness. Then servants arrived bearing steaming plates of roasted venison, winter vegetables, and loaves of fresh bread. Bowls of hot stew, thick with barley, were set on the table. They took their seats at the high table, joined soon after by Bran, Arya, Rickon, and a handful of northern lords who were part of Winterfell's household. The meal passed with the low hum of conversation. Ned found himself half listening, half lost in memories of battles and regrets, pausing only to gently caution Rickon about wolfish table manners when Shaggy Dog prowled near his chair. When the meal concluded, Ned and Catelyn retreated to their private chambers. A brazier glowed in the corner, though the chill seemed to permeate even the thickest of stones that winter. She poured them each a cup of mulled wine. Ned took it gratefully, letting the fragrant steam warm his face. Catelyn studied him over the rim of her cup. "You spoke of Sansa and Loras. Do you think the Tyrells will keep to that match? Margaery's letters are always so vague. She praises Sansa, but never mentions a wedding date." Ned considered. "The king will want it to secure the Tyrell alliance for the future. Mace Tyrell likely wants it too, to bind House Stark closer to the Iron Throne. But with a war going poorly, they might delay, or they might hasten it to ensure an unshakable bond. I truly cannot say." Catelyn frowned. "I want Sansa safe, and I want her to have a husband who shows her kindness. Ser Loras is a fine knight, but rumors swirl about his heart belonging elsewhere." Ned's expression darkened slightly. He had heard those whispers too. Loras Tyrell's affections rumored for Renly Baratheon, or so the court had once insinuated. "We do not know if there's truth to them," he said quietly. "Yet even so, a marriage might be purely political. I fear that is often the way of it in King's Landing." "Yes," said Catelyn, voice trembling. "I never wished it for her, especially after the heartbreak with the Lannisters' betrothal. But it's the path we're on now. And if it keeps her from harm in that viper's nest of a city, perhaps it is for the best." Ned set his wine down, crossing the room to where Catelyn stood. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "We will bring her home when the time is right," he promised, though the words tasted uncertain on his tongue. "We'll see this realm set to rights, or as near to it as we can manage." She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into him. The flicker of candlelight danced across her face. I pray your old friend can end this war soon." He nodded slowly. Robert was never one for half measures, but this war defies his usual tactics. Tywin is too shrewd, the West too wealthy. And Margaery's regency must navigate constant threats from within the capital. We can only hope the gods watch over them. Silence stretched. Outside, the wind howled softly, an unsettling note that seemed to creep through the mortar of Winterfell's walls. Ned thought of the old crypts below, how the kings of winter slept in stone tombs, eternally vigilant. He wondered if they judged him for the choices he had made. But he also felt a surge of resolve. He was Warden of the North. Though it pained him, he had done what he believed necessary to protect his homeland from the Lannisters' vengeance and from the Ironborn. And now, with the winter upon them, he could do little but hold fast. In King's Landing, the Red Keep glittered with torchlight as Queen Margaery presided over the evening court. The throne room was far from the frosty hush of Winterfell. There, tapestries depicting Baratheon stags were hung side by side with those of Tyrell roses, a symbolic pairing that sought to reassure the populace that their union was strong. The crown's men, many paid by Littlefinger's deep coin lending, stood about in polished mail. Queen Margaery, clad in a flowing gown of deep green embroidered with golden roses, sat at the foot of the Iron Throne itself, hearing petitions and disputes in the king's absence. The dais behind her was half-shrouded in shadow, but Cersei Lannister stood at the far side, stiff as a statue, golden hair braided into a severe crown. As Queen Dowager, though Margaery's supporters called her only Lady Cersei, she was permitted to attend. Her face, once famed for its beauty, looked pinched with resentment. Joffrey lurked near her, his green eyes flicking resentfully from Margaery to the guards. Each passing day had stripped more of the trappings of royalty from them, leaving them reduced in status to a nuisance the city merely tolerated. But they were still Lannisters, still dangerous. Margaery was no fool, and she kept them close under watch rather than exiling them. 2 petitioners knelt before the queen, a wealthy spice merchant and a minor lord with a dispute over shipping lanes. Margaery's expression was calm, with that graceful composure that had won her many admirers in the capital. She listened carefully to the arguments. When they finished, she spoke softly, but her voice carried. "I shall have Lord Giles of the Customs Office investigate your claims. If the shipping fees were mishandled, restitution will be made according to the king's law. I will sign an order today. Good men of trade have no cause to quarrel with one another when justice is available in this court." She glanced to the scribe. "Ensure the merchant's cargo is not impounded, but do not release the goods until Lord Giles completes his review. Is that fair to both parties?" The merchant bowed low, face relieved. The minor lord nodded stiffly, perhaps upset he had not gained a swift victory, but forced by etiquette to accept. "Thank you, your grace," he said, and they retreated. Margaery's gaze swept the hall, seeking the next petitioner. She spotted Littlefinger lingering near a column, a small smile on his lips. He inclined his head as though to say, "Very well done." She gave him a slight nod back. Then she motioned for the herald to call the next matter. The throng parted as a tall man with a battered sigil of House Rosby stepped forward, accompanied by a retinue of guards. Margaery recognized the anxious look that so many wore these days, expecting chaos at every turn. He spoke of bandits on the Rosby Road, brigands who might be Lannister deserters or displaced peasants from the Riverlands, terrorizing travelers. Margaery listened, pressing her fingers together. "We shall dispatch additional gold cloaks to secure the roads," she promised. "Even in wartime, the realm's heart, our capital, must remain safe for trade and safe for all loyal subjects." Her voice carried an undercurrent of steel. She would see to it that King's Landing did not descend into the anarchy the Lannisters likely hoped for. Too often, in times of extended war, the seats of power rotted from within. She would not let that happen, especially now that she had an heir in the cradle. Steffan Baratheon had been born healthy, a pink-cheeked babe that Robert had only briefly seen during a rushed visit between campaigns. Margaery cherished him fiercely, but she knew well how precarious his position might be if the realm collapsed. She needed stability above all else. She dismissed the petitioner, promising swift action. Then she stood, her skirts trailing behind her, and announced the close of open court for the evening. Attendants hastened to follow, gathering documents and records. As Margaery turned toward the small side door, she could feel Cersei's eyes boring into her. The tension in the air was palpable. Joffrey, too, glowered from behind his mother's shoulder, his fists clenched. Margaery offered them a serene, polite nod, but nothing more. Cersei did not respond. Once Margaery was safely away from the prying eyes of the court, she allowed herself a slight sigh, pressing a hand to her temple. A small retinue of Tyrell knights trailed her, along with a pair of gold cloaks assigned as personal guard. They wound through torchlit corridors until she reached her own solar. There, she dismissed the guards with a graceful wave except for her handmaidens and Sertal lad who kept post outside. Within the solar, a warm fire crackled and a cradle stood near an elegant chaise. The woman tending the baby, a wet nurse from the reach, rose and curtsied. "He's sleeping, your grace," she whispered, stepping back. Margaery moved to the cradle with soft footsteps. Her heart melted a fraction when she gazed down at Stefan, his tiny fist curled near his cheek, dark fuzz on his head. He had Robert's coloring, so the court said, though Margaery recognized a hint of Tyrell softness in the curve of his small face. She gently stroked his hair, mindful not to wake him. For a moment, all the burdens of the realm faded, replaced by a mother's love. But she could not remain in that tender moment. Too many responsibilities loomed. She beckoned the wet nurse to a seat by the fire, then took a seat herself, her handmaidens busying themselves with the day's letters on a nearby table. Margaery recalled the latest messages from the war front. No decisive battles, no peace. Renly Baratheon had written to her as well from Storm's End, where he had gone to gather more men and reinforce the fortress. He was anxious about the Lannisters launching a strike through the Kingswood, but so far, they had not. The letters from Eddard Stark were less frequent now that winter gripped the north. She wondered if he chafed at the king's demands even after all these months. A soft knock came at the solar door, and one of her maids cracked it open to peer outside. "Lord Peter Baelish," came a muffled murmur. Margaery gave a slight nod. "Show him in." She wasn't entirely sure what to make of Littlefinger, but she knew he was an essential piece in this game. He had the city's purse strings entwined with his personal ones. She would not let him catch her unprepared. Peter Baelish entered with a small bow, a hand resting lightly on the hilt of a jeweled dagger. He wore a subtle smile, as though amused by everything around him. "Your Grace," he said softly, "I trust the evening's court went smoothly." Margaery signaled for her maids to withdraw to the corners of the room. "We handled the usual spats and pleas for protection. The city's uneasy, but still we have order." "Indeed," said Littlefinger, moving a step closer. "You have managed that quite well. I dare say, if one must endure war, King's Landing has never been so well fed at this time of year." He flicked his gaze to the cradle. "The realm's new prince slumbers like an angel. A pity that the war has kept his father from spending more time with him." Margaery's expression remained composed. "He fights to ensure our son has a realm to inherit." Littlefinger put on an expression of mock sympathy. "Ah, of course. And how is that fight progressing? I hear talk that Tywin Lannister finds new ways to evade Robert's attempts at a pitched battle. Meanwhile, the Tullys suffer. Some might begin to wonder if King Robert's quest is hopeless, if the Iron Throne will yield only ruin. War is expensive, you know. The crown owes certain institutions quite a large sum." Margaery met his gaze squarely. "We are aware of our debts. If you seek repayment, you know where the gold is best found among those who still trade in King's Landing. I am confident we can continue to float new loans if necessary. The Tyrell coffers are not yet dry." A twinkle sparked in Littlefinger's eye. "I do so admire your confidence, your grace. But the city's coin supply relies on trade from the southwestern roads and the port at King's Landing. Should Tywin blockade us from the west or harass ships in the bay, well," he shrugged. Margaery stiffened. "Do you bring me news of a blockade?" "Not yet," he said, stepping closer to the fireplace. "But Jaime Lannister raids near the coasts of the Reach. I have whispers from the Arbor's traders that some of their shipments have been seized. If Mace Tyrell grows worried enough, he may reduce the flow of supplies to the city, focusing on defending his own lands." She did not let her face betray alarm. "My Lord Father will not abandon King's Landing while my son is here. He cannot. House Tyrell's commitment is unwavering." "Certainly," Littlefinger replied lightly, though his tone suggested he doubted the unwavering part. "I only note that as these disruptions continue, the cost of war rises. The more gold we need, the higher the interest, the deeper in debt we become. At some point, the Iron Bank of Bravos might decide to invest in other opportunities. Wars can be swayed by coin as much as swords." Margaery leveled a cool look at him. "If you have a point, Lord Baelish, speak it plainly." He made a show of sighing, glancing at the cradle. "Simply this, the war has no end in sight and each passing month drains the realm's treasury. If the Lannisters are not defeated or forced to yield soon, the Iron Bank might begin lending heavily to House Lannister itself if it suits them, thus prolonging conflict indefinitely. We could be seeing a generational war all for the sake of King Robert's pride. A negotiated settlement might be the wiser path. Perhaps you, as regent, could arrange such a thing. Margaery felt her heart quicken. A settlement? King Robert has declared Tywin a traitor, a rebel against the crown. He will not parley. Littlefinger's voice lowered. Ah, yes, but you are no mere bystander. You are the king's wife, the mother of his heir, and the caretaker of the realm. If you see a better path than endless war, perhaps you might guide us to it. She studied him in silence, her thoughts racing. She had never been blind to the possibility of some negotiated truce. She knew how destructive the war was. But Robert's fury at Tywin Lannister was near implacable, not to mention Tywin's pride. To force them to the table would require a major shift in the balance of power. I shall consider your advice, Lord Baelish, she said at length. If you have any details of a possible arrangement, bring them forth. We must weigh all options for the good of the realm. He smiled, bowing. I serve at your pleasure, your grace. I will inform you should I hear any rumors of the old lion's willingness to talk. With that he retreated, footsteps soft across the tiled floor. When he was gone, Margaery let out a slow breath. One of her handmaidens approached, worry etched on her face. Your grace, is there truly talk of a truce? Margaery turned to gaze at her sleeping son. Talk, yes, but it may be talk for talk's sake. Lord Baelish thrives on sowing possibilities and collecting whatever advantage arises. Still, she watched the slight rise and fall of the baby's chest. If this war truly cannot be won quickly, we may need to consider alternatives. Her voice trailed off. She knew Robert would rail at the suggestion. Yet if this war lasted another year or two, if the realm's debt soared, if famine took hold, the small folk would turn against the crown, no matter how many loaves she distributed in King's Landing. And then she worried even the Tyrell name might not save them from the wrath of the masses. She sat by the cradle for a long time after that, listening to the faint crackle of the fire, lost in thoughts of how to preserve what she had built, her position, her son's future, the fragile stability of the city. Perhaps, she thought, cunning would serve better than the brute force Robert loved. If only Robert would see reason. But she feared that the ghost of Rhaegar Targaryen still haunted him, fueling his lust for absolute victory against any foe. Far from the capital, across mud-slick roads and through drizzly gloom, King Robert Baratheon commanded a war camp outside a nameless hamlet on the fringes of the Riverlands. The banners of the Stag and Rose snapped in a cold wind. His royal pavilion stood in a churned field, the earth thick with old horse droppings and the remains of a half-frozen stream. Men huddled around campfires, cloaks pulled tight. In the distance, the silhouettes of pickets and watchtowers were barely visible through the fading light. Inside the pavilion, Robert hunched over a broad map, scowling. He had a thick cloak around his shoulders, the hood pushed back, revealing hair more streaked with gray than ever. His face was gaunt from months of campaigning. There was little feasting to be had on the march, and the old joys of drunken revelry had dimmed. He still drank, but not with the reckless abandon he had once shown. The near-fatal Boar wound had tempered some of his appetites, though not his anger. Even now, his side ached in cold weather, and he sometimes found himself short of breath. But he refused to show weakness. Barristan Selmy, commander of the King's Guard in the field, stood at his right, posture erect but face careworn. Ser Parman Crane, a Tyrell bannerman, waited respectfully to his left. Outside, the thudding of hooves announced a new arrival. Moments later, a guardsman lifted the pavilion flap to admit Stannis Baratheon, the king's elder younger brother, newly arrived from Dragonstone. Robert turned and let out a low grunt. Stannis, by the gods, you took your time. Stannis wore a cloak stained with salt and travel dust. His mouth was set in a hard line. I came as quickly as I could manage. My fleet attempted a raid near Lannisport, but Tywin's men had strengthened the coastal defenses. We achieved little more than burning a few fishing boats. A fruitless endeavor. Robert let out a frustrated breath. Damn him. We've pinned him, yet he wriggles free. I want a decisive battle, but the old lion keeps slipping away, nibbling at our allies in the Riverlands, turning each victory sour. Stannis stepped forward to the map. He does it because we allow him to. We spread ourselves too thin, trying to protect every hamlet and hold fast. War means sacrifices. If we want Tywin cornered, We must muster a single overwhelming force and dare him to face us in open battle. Sacrifice the small folk to his raids? Robert growled. Let him butcher and burn at will? Stannis' stern face revealed no mercy. War is not won by sentiment, brother. If we do not force Tywin's hand, he will keep us running in circles until we are exhausted. Then he will strike. It is better we gather all our men and march west. Let him come at us or yield. Robert balled his fists, the tension roping the muscles of his neck. Barristan Selmy stepped in quietly. Your Grace, with respect, the men are weary and short on supplies. If we concentrate too large an army in one place, we may run short of provisions in these war-torn lands. I know, Robert muttered, pacing. His breath caught slightly, and he pressed a hand to his side. Anger flared at the old wound's twinge. But I won't let Tywin keep up these raids. The Riverlands have suffered enough. Stannis' jaw tightened. Then we continue this war of attrition, draining the crown's coffers, letting Tywin feast on the miseries of common folk, while we achieve little. It will not end well. Robert rounded on him, eyes blazing. You have a knack for stating the obvious, Stannis, but do you have a better plan? Should we retreat entirely and let Tywin crown Joffrey? Or sign some humiliating truce that keeps the Lannisters in power? Stannis stiffened. I said no such thing. Only that if we desire total victory, we must be ruthless as Tywin is. Or we must reconsider the war's aims. Negotiate. If we remove certain demands. The king slammed his fist on the map table, rattling a metal cup. You want me to kneel to that golden bastard? After all he's done? His voice was raw. He hid behind Casterly Rock while we fought the Mad King, only to betray the Targaryens at the last moment to curry favor with me. He married me off to his scheming daughter, fathered bastards in the Red Keep, plotted to see Joffrey on the throne. I'll not sign away the realm to him now. I'd sooner die on this battlefield. Silence settled. Even Stannis' impassive face revealed a flicker of discomfort. Barristan cleared his throat. Your Grace, perhaps we can find a middle path. Terms that honor the crown but avoid further bloodshed. If Tywin were stripped of official power, forced to pay reparations, perhaps exiled from the city, the Lannister name might remain, but their strength would be curtailed. Robert looked at him as if wanting to roar his disapproval. Then he exhaled raggedly. Bollocks. It's all talk. Tywin has never agreed to bow to me since I put his daughter aside. He calls me a usurper, a fraud, claims Joffrey the rightful heir. Even if I offered him some half measure, he'd likely spit in my face. Ser Parman Crane ventured to speak. Your Grace, the Tyrell lords would follow you as long as it takes, but many of our lesser vassals are uneasy. We have sustained losses, the roads to Highgarden are threatened. If the war continues, we risk famine. Lady Olenna has written that the harvest was poor this year due to raiding. She urges caution. Robert's face twisted. Even the Tyrells. My new queen's family. They talk of caution. He dragged a hand down his beard, thick and unkempt these days. Damn it. Why must everything be so complicated? Stannis' voice was quieter now, though no less firm. War is no simple matter, Robert. You knew that when you claimed the throne in the rebellion. Robert closed his eyes, remembering with bitter nostalgia the days when he believed a well-swung warhammer could solve all ills. Rhaegar Targaryen had died on the Trident, and Robert's cause had seemed righteous, unstoppable. And yet everything after that victory had proven more entangled: politics, debts, a loveless marriage, and eventually the near-fatal hunt that changed all. Now here he was, old wounds reopened, literally and figuratively fighting a war that refused to yield. At last, he spoke in a voice low and hoarse. We hold position here through the winter. We'll secure the major roads, protect as many of the Riverlands folk as we can. In spring we muster anew, bring every man from the Reach, from the Crownlands, from the Stormlands. And the North too, if Ned can be convinced to ride again. Then we march west in overwhelming strength. That will end this, one way or another. His gaze flicked to Stannis. We'll do it your way. Concentrate our forces. Force Tywin to come out and fight. Stannis nodded, though his expression did not soften. If that is your decree, I shall see that my fleet is prepared to harass Lannisport come spring. Barristan bowed. I will inform the men, Your Grace. Ser Parman Crane offered a small gesture of agreement, though the glint in his eyes suggested worry at the Tyrell's growing burdens. Yes, Your Grace. Robert turned away and the meeting ended. Outside the pavilion, a cold drizzle had begun to fall, turning the half-frozen ground into muck. Robert stood at the threshold, gaze distant. He imagined Margaery in King's Landing wearing her careful smile. He imagined his son, Steffan, a child he barely knew. Then he pictured Ned Stark on the walls of Winterfell, the friend he had parted with in anger. So many threads pulled at him. But he could not yield to despair, not when the realm's fate rested on his shoulders. If Tywin wanted to draw this out, so be it. In the spring, Robert would bring such a hammer down that Tywin's cunning would crumble. That was the dream anyway. Come morning, he summoned a royal messenger. He scratched out a letter to Margaery, informing her of his plan for spring, requesting more men, more coin, more supplies. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added a postscript for Ned Stark, acknowledging that winter might prevent the North from riding, but expressing the hope that come the thaw, the North would answer his call once more. He signed it Robert in a heavy hand, though he doubted Ned would see it as an olive branch. The ravens flew, the war dragged on, and the realm trudged forward. In Winterfell's Godwood, Eddard Stark knelt on the damp ground before the heart tree, the red leaves quivering in a light wind. Snow clung to the high branches, and the carved face wept red sap as though lamenting the realm's endless strife. Ned's cloak was dusted with white, but he scarcely noticed. The hush of the Godwood enveloped him, bringing solace, though not comfort. He had come to pray for guidance. The letter from King Robert had arrived that morning, brought by a raven that nearly froze in the night. Ned had read it twice. The king asked him to stand by in the north until spring, then rally men for one final push to crush Tywin. The words were couched in half apology, half demand. The memory of their last heated exchange gnawed at Ned. Yet Robert was still his friend, his brother in all but blood. They had bled together once to end a tyranny. Could they do so again when half the realm had already bled for months on end? He closed his eyes and murmured a quiet prayer to the old gods, letting his breath mist in the frigid air. He prayed for the North, for peace, for his family scattered by the winds of war. He prayed for his friend who carried the burden of the throne and for all the souls lost in these battles. Yet no divine voice answered, only the hush of falling snow. When he rose, he felt the presence of someone behind him. He turned to see Catelyn, wrapped in a thick fur-lined cloak, her face set in concern. "You've been here a long while," she said softly, stepping forward. Ned gave a small nod. "I received Robert's letter. He wants us to prepare for a renewed campaign in the spring." She drew closer, slipping an arm through his. "Then we have time at least. We need not march now." "Time," Ned repeated. "Yes, but the war will not vanish. The spring will bring fresh battles, more death." Catelyn glanced at the tree, the carved face staring silently. "All wars must end sometime, Ned. Perhaps if the king's push is strong enough, Tywin will yield." Ned tasted bitterness. Tywin Lannister does not yield easily. He still holds his domain in the west. Even if we muster the largest army in a generation, he might be cunning enough to slip away to leave us in a quagmire. Meanwhile, the people starve, the realm bleeds. I fear this war might last for years, wearing us all down. She looked away. Then what are our choices? Abandon Robert entirely? Stay in the north and let the realm unravel? Ned closed his eyes a moment. I cannot abandon him. Much as I fear the cost, I swore an oath to the crown and to him as my friend. The North cannot stand alone forever if the Lannisters hold the rest of Westeros in their grip. And Sansa is in King's Landing, aligned with the Tyrell Queen. Our fates are entangled. Catelyn pressed her lips together. Yes. She lifted her gaze to meet his. Then we do our duty, for better or worse. Pray the war can end. And if it cannot, we protect our own as best we can. A distant howling of wind wove through the branches overhead. Ned gently squeezed her arm. I can only hope that come spring, the snows melt early. Marching an army down the King's Road in deep snow would be impossible. But I will do what must be done. She nodded, her face showing a quiet acceptance. Then together they left the Godwood, their footsteps crunching over fresh snow. Winter in the north was a challenge all its own. Drifts rose high along the walls of Winterfell, and the region's roads became perilous. Yet Ned sent riders to his bannermen, instructing them to conserve grain, to keep their men prepared for a possible call to arms after the thaw. He wrote letters to King Robert acknowledging that he would march if conditions permitted. He wrote to Margaery Tyrell as well, in courtesy, offering blessings for her newborn. No response came from the queen, though the king sent occasional messages of stasis and frustration. The year turned yet again. The war in the south carried on, skirmishes and raids, but no grand battles. Bran's 14th name day came in midwinter, a subdued celebration of sweet cakes and storytelling in the great hall. Arya looked restless, half the time training with the master-at-arms in the yard, half the time pestering her father for news of Sansa. Rickon, too young to fully grasp the realm's troubles, simply ran with Shaggy Dog through the castle, sometimes watched warily by the guards. Robb spent much of his days conferring with the lords about supply lines, forging alliances with proud men like the Great John and the Manderleys, ensuring they would answer the king's call if the roads cleared. But behind every conversation, the question lingered. Was this the right course for House Stark? One snowy dawn, Robb joined Ned in the courtyard as wagons were prepared for a journey to White Harbor. They watched as a small caravan was loaded with cloth, finished leathers, and other goods meant to trade for fish and salt. Robb had arranged the exchange, hoping to keep the North's economy afloat through the harsh season. He seemed more confident these days, though Ned could see the lines of responsibility etched in his face. "I'll ride with them as far as the last river," Robb said. "Make sure there's no trouble from outlaws. We've had some bandits in the forest, men displaced by the Ironborn raids." Ned nodded. "Take a few good men with you. Return swiftly. When the ravens come from King Robert, we'll need to finalize how many swords we can send if the thaw comes early." Robb set his jaw. "Father, we must also think of the Ironborn. Theon Greyjoy is with us, but the boy has no influence over his father. If Balon Greyjoy takes advantage of our absence again..." Ned held up a hand. "I know. We leave enough men to guard the coast. We can do no less." He frowned. "Go on, see to White Harbor. We'll speak more upon your return." They clasped arms, and Robb mounted his horse, a northern-bred stallion with thick winter fur. A retinue of riders followed him out the gates, leaving Ned to watch their departure in the swirling snow. He prayed the old gods would keep them safe. It had come to this, constant vigilance, balancing war with war. This was the legacy of Robert surviving that Boar attack, the realm locked in a protracted power struggle that seemed to benefit no one but war. Profiteers. At last, the snows began to lessen, the days growing marginally longer. The faintest hints of spring teased the air. In King's Landing, Margaery Tyrell had spent the winter strengthening her hold on the city, continuing her relief efforts for the poor, pressing the city watch to remain disciplined. Cersei Lannister grew increasingly desperate, her children overshadowed, her father far away. Joffrey's sullen resentment curdled into petty cruelties, though he had little real authority. And Margaery, unflinching, would not let him gain a foothold among the gold cloaks. Word of small riots in Flea Bottom reached her ears occasionally, displaced peasants from the Riverlands who had fled the war, living in squalor. She sent bread wagons, but that alone could not solve the problem. Her letters from Robert told her the final blow against Tywin was nearing. If she would only send more men, more gold. She complied as best she could without bankrupting her own father's resources. But she saw how precarious everything was. The city's mood was watchful, like a dog that had been kicked too many times. That was the environment into which Sansa Stark had grown, no longer the wide-eyed girl who once dreamed of golden nights and noble tournaments. She had learned caution at court, speaking politely with Margaery's ladies, never straying alone for fear of Cersei's hidden claws. She had come to admire Queen Margaery, who managed to be both gentle and cunning, though Sansa sometimes missed the simpler life at Winterfell. She wore fine dresses with southern fashions. She performed the dances of the Reach at feasts. Occasionally, she rode in a carriage through the city, accompanied by Tyrell guards, and saw the hungry faces of the crowds. She would return in silence, haunted by the difference between the world she had dreamed of and the reality of war. Late in the winter, Sansa received a letter from her mother in Winterfell. It was full of affectionate words, updates on the family, subtle questions about her betrothal. Sansa read it in her small chamber, tears pricking her eyes. She was no longer certain if she longed to marry Ser Loras or dreaded it. The Knight of Flowers was handsome and kind enough, but distant. He was rarely in King's Landing these days, often dispatched to guard Margaery's supply wagons heading north or to rally Tyrell bannermen in the Reach. When he was present, he treated Sansa courteously, but as though she were a child. Still, the arrangement persisted, championed by both Margaery and her grandmother, Lady Olenna, from afar. Sansa picked up a quill and tried to write a reply, describing life at court. She found herself faltering, uncertain how to convey her feelings. Finally, she decided on gentle truths. The queen is kind. The city is restless. I am safe. I wish I could see you all again. She signed it with love and set the letter aside for the maester. As she did, she heard voices echoing in the corridor. She recognized Margaery's melodic tone, calm but firm, and another voice, cooler and sharper, Cersei's. Curious, Sansa tiptoed toward the door, easing it open a crack. The two queens were speaking in the hall, Margaery flanked by two of her ladies, Cersei alone. I told you, Cersei was hissing. Joffrey deserves the respect of a prince, not to be relegated to the role of a hostage in his own home. Margaery's reply was measured. He is free to move as he pleases. No one has barred him from the city. If you mean to say the gold cloaks do not obey his every whim, that is because the king appointed me regent, and the city watch answers to the throne. Joffrey is not the heir. My son is. Cersei's face twisted. Your son is a babe, untested. Joffrey is nearly of age to rule. You and your father have stolen what is rightfully his. Margaery spoke quietly, eyes unwavering. It was your father who turned the realm against itself by proclaiming a false heir. Do not pretend the city has forgotten that. I have shown you courtesy, allowed you to remain at court. Do not force my hand, Lady Cersei. Cersei's hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. You dare address me like that? I am Queen Dowager. You are the mother of children the king has deemed illegitimate, Margaery said, voice like velvet over steel. That is the law, however harsh. I have not cast you out, but if you threaten the peace of this city, I will take measures to protect it. She inclined her head with regal finality. Good day. She turned, her ladies following, leaving Cersei in the hallway quivering with rage. Sansa held her breath, afraid even to breathe, until Cersei stormed away in the opposite direction. Only then did she carefully close her door, heart pounding. The tension at court was a coiled snake waiting to strike. She thought of writing more in her letter, but decided against it. Why worry her mother further? Another fortnight passed, and the first mild breezes of early spring arrived in King's Landing. The roads, though still treacherous, began to thaw. Raven after raven departed the Red Keep, bearing instructions to gather men for Robert's great offensive. Margaery corresponded with her father and grandmother in Highgarden, urging them to bolster the king's forces. Meanwhile, she remained vigilant about the threat of a Lannister coup within the city. She did not doubt that Cersei's minions lurked, hoping to poison the hearts of the gold cloaks or incite an uprising. Yet it was not within the city that the next blow fell. Instead, news arrived that Tywin Lannister had launched a sudden strike at Ashford in the Reach, burning storehouses meant to feed the king's armies. House Tyrell reeled from the blow, and panic rippled in King's Landing. Without those storehouses, feeding the assembled armies would prove difficult. Margaery read the letter from her father with a clenched jaw. Tywin had moved swiftly under cover of confusion while Robert's main host was still stuck near the Riverlands. Jaime Lannister had circled from the west, crossing Mander territory before the Watchers realized his aim. Another year, another cunning Lannister maneuver. Margaery wasted no time. She summoned the small council, or what remained of it, in the city. Renly Baratheon sat in for the king, though he was often absent on errands for his brother. Varys glided into the council chambers, eyes full of secrets. Littlefinger arrived last, his expression pensive. When Margaery informed them of Tywin's strike, a tense silence fell. Renly frowned. This is a grave blow. We were counting on the Reach to feed us. Margaery's voice was tight. Yes, my father is rallying, but the Lannisters have disrupted supply lines. Without a swift victory, Robert's push in spring might falter from lack of provisions. Littlefinger tapped his fingers together, and the crown's coffers remain strained. We can afford to purchase grain from Essos, perhaps, if we can secure shipping, but that would be enormously expensive and time-consuming. Renly cursed under his breath. My brother will not want to wait. He'll want to march as soon as possible while the advantage is still uncertain. Tywin once again proves himself sly as a fox. Varys spoke in his mild, insinuating tones. Perhaps, my lady, this is the moment to consider an alternative. If the Lannisters are so difficult to subdue, perhaps your father and the king might open negotiations? He let the words hang in the air. Margaery's eyes flicked to Littlefinger, recalling a similar suggestion. She knew Robert would be furious at any talk of parley. But she also knew how dire the situation was. Robert will not consider it unless forced, she said. And Tywin is not likely to yield anything of substance unless forced. We are at an impasse. Varys placed a hand over his heart. An impasse that costs thousands of lives. The city is uneasy, the countryside ravaged. I only mention it because your grace has proven adept at seeing all angles. She said nothing, the tension in her posture enough of an answer. They debated how to secure more grain, how to reorganize the supply lines from Highgarden. No perfect solution emerged. When the council ended, the group dispersed in uneasy silence. Margaery lingered, gazing at the map of the 7 kingdoms pinned to the table. She studied the shape of the reach, the markings around Ashford, the distant line of the Westerlands. Even with Robert's unstoppable will, Tywin had staved off defeat for over a year, and the cost of continuing rose by the day. The seeds of a negotiated peace lay in her mind, but it would mean confronting Robert, convincing him to set aside vengeance. Could she do that? She thought of the child in the cradle, the future of House Baratheon and House Tyrell bound together. If the war destroyed one side, the other might fall as well. Slowly, she wrapped her fingers around the base of a miniature stag on the map, the piece representing Robert's forces. She slid it westward a fraction. One decisive push, she murmured to herself. But at what price? In the west, Tywin Lannister gathered his knights, emboldened by his strike at Ashford. Word reached him that the king's host was beginning to move, swollen by new forces from the Crownlands and the Stormlands. If the north joined them in significant numbers, the combined might of the realm could indeed crush him. But Tywin had learned from his mistakes in the early days of the war. He would not meet Robert head-on unless the odds suited him. Instead, he would raid, retreat, pick off stragglers. Jaime had proven adept at lightning strikes. Kevin Lannister managed logistics. And rumors swirled that the Iron Bank might be ready to finance the Lannisters if the war dragged on, though Tywin kept that knowledge close to his chest. What do we hear of the North? Tywin asked one early spring evening in a war council at the large tent near his field headquarters. Around him, the Lannister bannermen stood attentive as if carved from stone. Jaime lounged at a corner, fiddling with a golden quill, smirking. "My lord," said Lord Brax, "we have no indication the northern lords are marching south yet. The roads are likely still poor. They may come if the thaw continues." Tywin nodded. "We must be prepared. Eddard Stark is no fool, but loyalty to the crown may compel him. If we face the combined might of the realm, we must ensure our supply lines remain unbroken." Jaime's smirk twisted into a grin. "Or we could present Stark's men with a more appealing target. Perhaps reintroduce the Ironborn to their shores? The Greyjoys would love to see the North unguarded." Tywin gave his son a cool look. "That is not guaranteed. Balon Greyjoy is an unpredictable ally. We gained little from the Greyjoy rebellion. But keep all options open. If Eddard Stark marches, I want him harried at every turn." Jaime shrugged. "As you will, father." He set down the quill. "Perhaps you should pen a letter to the wolf in Winterfell. Offer him terms, tell him the Lannisters will withdraw if he keeps the North out of the war. Let him watch his precious friend fight and die alone." Tywin's gaze settled on Jaime, golden eyes unblinking. "Such a letter might reveal too much of our position. We keep quiet. Let the North come if it will. We will break them as we will break the rest. Robert Baratheon betrayed our house when he cast aside your sister. The time for negotiation is past." Jaime's expression turned sardonic. "So the war goes on. At least it's more interesting than rotting in King's Landing with that Tyrell woman on the throne." Tywin ignored the jab. He surveyed the map. "We have inflicted a wound on the Tyrell supply lines. Now we slip back to the west, drawing Robert's armies after us. If they chase, they grow extended, vulnerable. We strike again. And again. In time, even Robert's thick skull may realize he cannot force victory unless the entire realm unites behind him. That is what we must prevent." And so the Lannisters readied themselves for another season of cunning maneuvers. Quietly, Tywin wrote letters to certain lords in the Reach and the Stormlands who might be swayed by gold or resentful of the Tyrell ascendancy. Whispers spread like roots beneath the surface, promising that if the war ended in a stalemate, Tywin would reward those who had remained neutral or covertly aided him. In the north, the thaw was slow but inevitable. Streams ran, muddying roads. Maester Lewin's ravens flew in and out carrying pleas from the king. Robert's letter arrived at Winterfell urging Ned to march if at all possible, praising him as a loyal friend, offering the prospect of ending the war once and for all. With every passing week, Ned observed the roads near Moat Cailin, measuring whether they could bear an army's weight. He conferred with his bannermen, who grudgingly prepared to muster. The stories of Lannister outrages in the Riverlands and the Reach angered the Northmen, but still they balked at a long southern campaign. Glover men recalled how stretched they had been by the Ironborn. The Umbers wanted assurances that the realm would repay them in some measure. But Ned's quiet authority prevailed. They agreed in principle to join if the conditions of travel allowed. Catelyn stood by Ned's side on a windy morning when a fresh raven from King Robert arrived, describing Tywin's raid at Ashford. Ned frowned as he read. He begs me to come. But the roads, each day counts, Cat. I cannot let the king fight alone if we can truly help. Yet I fear leaving the north undefended again. She touched his arm. Our younger sons and daughters we can leave behind, protected by a strong garrison at Winterfell. You and Robb could lead an army. The Ironborn might see an opening, yes, but we cannot keep turning away from Robert's calls, not if the snows melt enough for the roads to be passable. If we do, he will view it as betrayal. Ned studied her face, seeing the heaviness of the choice reflected in her eyes. You are right, he said, voice low. Summon the bannermen. We will march within the fortnight if the weather holds. Another war, he thought. Another journey south, away from Winterfell. The bitter taste of it coated his throat, but he saw no other path. Robb, upon hearing the decision, accepted it grimly. He would command a portion of the northern host, riding under Ned's orders. Bran and Rickon would remain in Winterfell. Arya would remain as well. Ned would not risk taking her into that nest of vipers in King's Landing, though she bristled at being left behind. You'll need good warriors, father, she argued, half in jest, but Ned refused. She stormed off in frustration, and Ned felt a pang of guilt. Yet war was no place for a girl of her age, especially not a girl with Arya's restless spirit. Thus the muster began. Horns sounded from Winterfell's towers. Ravens flew to the Umbers, the Manderleys, the Boltons, the Karstarks, calling them to arms. Spring slowly spread, the roads clearing in patches. When the first of the bannermen arrived, Ned oversaw the forging of new swords, the distribution of supplies. Catelyn worked tirelessly to ensure stores were set aside for the castle, that the younger children's guardians had all they needed. By the time 3,000 men had gathered at Moat Cailin, Ned judged the roads passable enough to venture south. He prayed the old gods would watch over Winterfell in their absence. The march began. Rattling wagons, lines of mounted knights, columns of foot soldiers trudging through half-frozen mud. A smaller force than Robert might have wished, for many lords would not risk their entire strength after the hardships of the past year. But it was a formidable host all the same, bearing the direwolf banner that signaled House Stark's return to the Southern War. Ned rode at the head, with Robb at his side, the wind keen on their cheeks. Each step away from the north weighed on Ned, but the king's call echoed in his mind. If Robert truly believed a final decisive strike was possible, then perhaps, just perhaps, this could be the war's end. Southward they went day by day, passing the Neck and entering the Riverlands. They encountered signs of battle soon enough: burned farms, rotting carcasses of horses, small folk begging for bread. Ned's men did what they could to help, but the broader devastation was evident. Tywin's marauding outriders had swept through these parts, or the Tully levies had clashed with them in skirmishes. The Riverlands had become a battleground once more, reminiscent of the scars left from the last time House Tully had resisted a king. Outside a ruined village near the Red Fork, they found Edmure Tully himself, leading a weary band of men in clearing debris. He embraced Ned stiffly, relief in his eyes. By the gods, you've come at last, Edmure said. I was not certain you would. The winter was long up north, or so I hear. Ned inclined his head. It was. I am sorry we could not aid you sooner. We come now, if the roads allow, to join the king against Tywin. Edmure's face was grim. The king is forging south and west, mustering near Harrenhal. He means to draw Tywin into open battle near the Blackwater Rush, I hear. My uncle Brynden has scouted. Tywin has a large host near the Gold Road. The lines are forming, Ned. This could be it. The final confrontation. Or else a bloodbath from which no one emerges a victor. They rode together, exchanging updates. Edmure led Ned's army toward Riverrun first, so they could rest and resupply. Along the way, they saw families fleeing, men exhausted from war. Robb's eyes were hard as flint at the sight, and Ned could see the boy's anger building. War tested them all, forging or breaking them. At Riverrun, an older, frail Lord Hoster Tully lay abed, drifting in and out of fever. Catelyn's absence weighed on Ned as he paid his respects. Edmure took them on a grim tour of the battered defenses. Tully men had fallen in countless skirmishes. If the king can press Tywin west, we can hold him pinned at the Gold Road with the Tyrell forces pushing from the south, Edmure explained. But the Lannisters always have another trick. Jaime is rumored to be leading a band that threatens the route from the Reach. If they isolate the king from Margaery's supply lines, we starve. Ned recognized the pattern. Tywin's cunning was a net cast wide. The final confrontation might be decided not just by one battle, but by who kept their men fed. He thought of the North's endless logistical difficulties, the men who might break off if the campaign dragged on. He prayed Robert understood these risks. In his mind, he could see the ruddy face of the king, lines of pain and rage etched from months of frustration. Let him remain strong, Ned prayed, let him see reason if the moment calls for it. They departed Riverrun with full wagons, courtesy of Edmure's scrounging. At last, they advanced toward the king's main camp near Harrenhal. As they neared the enormous, half-ruined fortress rising from the horizon, Ned's chest tightened. Harrenhal had been the site of so many grim tales, from the Age of Heroes to the burning wrought by Aegon's dragons. Now it served as a staging ground for another pivotal conflict. Great was the swirl of tents outside the blackened walls, the fields churning with thousands of men. Flags of stags, roses, and rivermen flew in the wind. Upon arrival, Ned's host was greeted by outriders wearing the Baratheon sigil. They led them through the labyrinth of tents until Ned and Robb could dismount at the king's pavilion. Robert himself emerged to meet them. He looked older than ever, hair and beard shot with gray, gone from harsh campaigning, but still wide-shouldered and imposing. He had a new scar across his jaw, half hidden by whiskers. For a long moment, he stared at Ned, eyes full of conflicting emotions. Then he opened his arms. "Ned," he muttered. "Gods, you came." Ned stepped forward, clasping Robert's forearm, the old familiarity flooding back despite the tension. "We rode as soon as we could. My lord, my friend." Robert pulled him into a brief embrace, the tension of so many months easing an inch. "I know I was harsh before," he said, voice thick, "but I need you, Ned. Tywin remains as slippery as an eel. I vow we end this war here and now." Ned's gaze flicked over the camp. "We have men from the north. They are prepared to fight, but supplies are short. We must be swift." Robert nodded grimly. "Swift indeed. This time we force Tywin to a pitched battle. Either he comes or we drive him into his own lands. The Tyrells push from the south, we hold him here. There will be no more of his damned raids. We'll finish it." His voice rang with that old rebellious fervor. Robb stepped up and bowed stiffly. Robert studied the young man, a half-smile forming. "Robb Stark, is it? Taller than I remember. You have the look of your father, boy." Robb flushed, uncertain how to respond. "Your Grace," he said. "We stand ready." Robert snorted, giving Ned a wry look. "All these years, and you've turned out a loyal one. I never doubted you truly, but the war has frayed my wits more than once. Let's see if we can manage to send Tywin scurrying." He led them inside the pavilion, where lords clustered around a large table strewn with maps. Stannis was there, sullen-faced, beside Renly, who offered a breezy smile at Ned's arrival. Ser Barristan Selmy inclined his head in greeting, and Margaery's uncle Garland Tyrell stood near the far side, projecting calm competence. Talk soon turned to strategy, lines of supply, possible routes for Tywin's approach. Ned listened, offering measured counsel when asked. His own sense told him that Tywin might strike unexpectedly, and that they should guard their flanks. But Robert pushed for a bolder plan. "We do not cower in Harrenhal. We move west, meet him near the Blackwater Rush or even beyond if we must. We lure him into engagement before he can slip away." Some lords muttered apprehensively about risking open ground. Stannis insisted on caution, pointing to how Tywin might outflank them if they marched too rashly. Renly argued for a more flamboyant plan, employing feigned retreats, trusting in the Tyrell cavalry. The debate raged long into the night. Ned spoke last, quietly endorsing a measured advance that forced Tywin's hand without leaving their supply lines vulnerable. Robert, for once, seemed to listen. Finally, they agreed on a compromise. A moderate advance west from Harrenhal, seizing key crossing points along the rivers, building field defenses to prevent Tywin from circling behind. Meanwhile, word would be sent to Margaery's father, instructing him to push north. If all went as planned, Tywin would find himself pinned between two sizable armies. "He cannot run forever," Robert declared. "We'll show him the realm stands united. He might have gold, but gold cannot fight a war alone." Preparations began at once. Harrenhal's smiths worked day and night forging weapons. Scouts roamed the roads searching for sign of Lannister outriders. The northern men pitched their tents near the old scorched towers, marveling at the fortress's eerie grandeur. Ned felt an unshakable sense of foreboding, as if ancient ghosts clung to the blackened walls. War had come here before, and now they brought it anew. At the heart of the camp, Robert's pavilion bustled with activity. Ned found himself pulled into strategy councils at all hours or pressed to settle disputes among their combined forces. When he could, he walked the camp with Robb, ensuring the Northmen had what they needed. He encountered glimpses of old faces from the rebellion, men who had once marched under the banner of the Trident to topple the Targaryens. They looked older, wearier. Some recognized him, saluting, others wore hollow stares. War was never the same once you'd lived it more than once. A week later, the grand host broke camp. Tens of thousands marched west. War horns echoed across the plains. Robert rode at the head, a polished warhammer strapped to his saddle, though he no longer looked quite so invincible. Ned rode near him, exchanging tense words of encouragement. The banners of House Baratheon and House Tyrell mingled with those of House Stark, House Tully, House Baratheon of Dragonstone, the Crownlands lords, and lesser banners from the Stormlands. It was a sight to rival the host that had once marched against the Mad King. If this did not defeat Tywin Lannister, perhaps nothing would. Their scouts reported glimpses of Lannister outriders always slipping away into the hills. River fords were seized, small skirmishes erupted, but the Lannister main force stayed out of sight. Rumor said Tywin was massing near the Blackwater Rush, waiting for an advantage. Meanwhile, from the south, the Tyrell bannermen approached. The realm converged. Battle seemed inevitable. Even the crows that circled overhead seemed to sense a feast was near. Days melded into nights spent in tension. Ned found little rest, the memory of battles past haunting him. He prayed that if they must fight, it would end swiftly. He thought of Sansa in King's Landing, Arya, Bran, Rickon in Winterfell, Catelyn waiting for news. He could not let them down. Finally, the armies drew close. Scouts galloped back, breathless. Tywin's host had formed lines near a broad stretch of river meadows, the red lion of Lannister shining in the midday sun. Their numbers were significant, though not quite as large as Robert's alliance. But Tywin's men were well-equipped, disciplined, and cunning. The field was set. Robert called for immediate deployment of battle lines, ignoring those who favored entrenchment. This was the moment he had craved for over a year, a chance to face Tywin at last. Ned found himself at the center with Robert and Stannis commanding the main body of infantry. Robb Stark led a contingent of northern cavalry on one flank, coordinating with Stormlander knights. On the other flank, Garland Tyrell led the Tyrell cavalry, hoping to smash the Lannister lines at the right moment. In the distance, Ned could see the glint of Lannister steel, the shape of siege engines or catapults. The air carried the smell of damp grass, a far cry from the frigid snows of Winterfell. He swallowed hard, pulling up the visor of his helm. At Robert's side, Barristan and Selmy sat astride a white horse, silent but alert. Robert hefted his hammer, a ghost of his old grin dancing across his lips. At last, he muttered, turning to Ned. "We do this together, Ned, as it was always meant to be." Ned nodded, though dread coiled in his stomach. Then came the horns. The king's line began to advance. The Lannisters answered with their own horns. Troops surged forward in disciplined ranks. The final confrontation was at hand. Battle crashed across the fields like thunder. Arrows filled the sky. Cavalry thundered, meeting spears in horrifying collisions. Men screamed, horses shrieked, mud churned underfoot. Ned kept near Robert, leading the northern footmen in a slow, relentless push. He parried a blow from a Lannister knight, cutting the man down. His blood pounded in his ears, old instincts returning from the rebellion. Beside him, Robert roared, swinging his hammer with savage force, though his movements lacked some of the old fluidity. The king's near brush with death, the year of war, had taken a toll. On the right flank, Tyrell cavalry clashed with Lannister swordsmen. Garland Tyrell tried to break through, but found Jaime Lannister waiting, turning the tide with cunning flanking maneuvers. On the left, Robb Stark led his riders in a bold charge, smashing through a line of Lannister archers. But the Lannister reserve swung around, threatening to encircle him. Reports traveled fast on the battlefield, men shouting, horns blowing. Ned realized the lines were folding in strange ways, each side struggling for an opening. Hours of blood and chaos ensued. At times, Ned lost sight of Robert in the swirling press. Arrows fell like rain, catapults hurled flaming pitch. Bodies littered the meadow. The stench of gore and sweat thickened. The northern infantry fought bravely, but the Lannister discipline was formidable. Ned heard the clang of steel on steel, felt the jar of his arm with each parry, the hot sting of a cut on his forearm. He pressed on. Suddenly, from the south, horns blared anew. The Tyrell reinforcements had arrived in force, streaming onto the field, banners of roses snapping. A wave of fresh cavalry crashed into the Lannister rearguard. Cheers went up among the king's men. This was the final stroke. Under that pressure, the Lannister lines wavered, threatened to collapse. Ned fought free of a knot of foes in time to glimpse Tywin Lannister himself on a distant rise, his golden armor shining. The old lion stared at the battlefield, flanked by mounted knights. He seemed to weigh the odds. Then, with a gesture, he signaled a retreat. Trumpets sounded from the Lannister side. A great roar erupted among the king's forces. They pressed forward, spurred by the prospect of victory. The Lannisters fell back in good order, but the presence of Tyrell horsemen in their rear turned the withdrawal into a rout in some pockets. Men cast aside arms and fled. Others tried to form a rearguard around Tywin. The sky dimmed with the smoke of burning siege towers. Ned's chest heaved, sweat mingling with blood. He turned, scanning for Robert. The king was near, dismounting to help a wounded soldier. He looked up and caught Ned's gaze, a fierce grin crossing his battered face. "We have them," he roared over the din. Yet the Lannisters were not wholly broken. Tywin's rearguard, commanded by Jaime, managed a disciplined retreat, giving ground but slashing at pursuers. Before the king's men could deliver a final blow, dusk descended and the two armies pulled apart, the plain littered with the dead. The Lannisters withdrew west under cover of darkness, battered but not annihilated. Tywin still lived, his core knights still intact. Yet the king's side claimed a clear advantage, the field theirs, the moral victory shining. Fires burned, flickering across the night. Amid the chaos of the aftermath, medics hurried among the injured. Ned collapsed onto a crate near the king's command tent, removing his dented helm. His hair was damp with sweat, streaked with grime. Robb arrived, limping slightly, a shallow cut on his thigh. They embraced. "We drove them back," Robb breathed. "But so many are dead." Ned nodded, throat tight. "War spares no one lightly." Robert Baratheon appeared, coated in dust, blood splashed on his cloak. He was breathing heavily but triumphant. "We've done it, Ned. Tywin is on the run. Let him slink away to Casterly Rock with his tail between his legs. We hold the battlefield. It's over, by the gods." Ned rose wearily, scanning the horizon. "He's not destroyed, Robert. He may regroup." Robert waved a hand dismissively, though pain shadowed his eyes. "He might, but this is the blow we needed. The realm will see him as beaten. His men's morale is shattered. We can press onward, lay siege to the rock if we must. Soon enough, he'll sue for peace." Ned studied his old friend's face, seeing the flicker of savage joy there. Robert had craved this moment, the sense of victory. It might indeed tilt the war's balance, force Tywin to the table or face utter ruin. But the cost was plain in the wounded men, the scorched fields, the weeping survivors. Ned found no joy in it. Still, as he looked around at the battered banners of the stag, the rose, the direwolf, he realized how far they had come since Robert survived the boar's tusks. They had waged a slow, cruel war. Now perhaps the end was in sight. With night fully fallen, the king's army set camp amid the wreckage. Torches lined the perimeter, guards posted against any Lannister counterattack. Tents for the wounded stood in rows. The moans of injured men filled the darkness. Ned walked among them, offering what comfort he could, though the maesters worked frantically. He saw men from the north lying beside Stormlanders, Tyrells and Tullis, all battered by the same conflict. That night, in the king's command tent, a council convened to decide the next move. Robert was adamant. They would pursue Tywin at first light, press him west until he surrendered or was cornered. Stannis argued for caution, but Robert's confidence was unshakable. Garland Tyrell and Renly both agreed they should maintain momentum. Ned, exhausted, voiced only a mild protest that they should secure the wounded and reorganize supply lines first. Robert relented enough to give them 2 days to regroup. Then they would march. "This is the final piece, Ned," he insisted, sounding half like the young warrior who had toppled the Targaryens. "We end it here." And so, in the gloom of that ephemeral victory, House Stark found itself more deeply entangled in the realm's battles than ever. Their banners flew among the rest, proclaiming the North's loyalty and forging new scars on the field of war. Eddard Stark, haunted by the cost, could only hope that this truly signaled the twilight of a conflict that had nearly devoured Westeros. If Tywin could be forced to kneel, then maybe at last the realm could heal. Maybe Sansa could come home. Maybe Arya, Bran, Rickon, all of them could be a family once more. And maybe Robert Baratheon, who had defied death by a boar's tusk, could become the king he was meant to be, or at least a king who no longer drowned the kingdom in blood. Ned knelt in the corner of the tent, ignoring the bustle of lords departing, shutting his eyes in silent prayer. The new Queen Margaery was not there, but he imagined she would soon hear the news. "Let there be peace," he whispered to the old gods, to the Seven, to any power that would listen. Outside, the torchlight flickered on the upturned faces of the dead. War might be won on the battlefield, but the true cost would linger for generations. Still, they pressed on, clinging to the hope that if Robert had survived the boar's tusks, he might yet guide them through the darkness, and perhaps, in surviving, they could all find a new beginning.